On a sweltering July afternoon in 2019, the facade of suburban bliss was shattered in a way that would haunt the community for years to come. At the center of this tragedy were the Hendersons. Thaddeus, a 45-year-old investment banker with a reputation for his work ethic and community involvement, and his wife Margot, a 43-year-old part-time yoga instructor known for her vibrant personality and infectious laugh. They had been fixtures in the community for over a decade, their seemingly perfect marriage the envy of many. Next door lived the Coopers, Elaine, a widow, and her 19-year-old son Liam, a college sophomore home for the summer. The Coopers had moved in 5 years ago, and while they kept to themselves more than most, they were generally well liked by their neighbors. No one could have predicted that these ordinary lives would collide in such a catastrophic way. Thaddeus Henderson had always been driven by ambition. Born to working-class parents in rural Iowa, he had clawed his way up the social ladder through sheer determination and an almost obsessive work ethic. By his early 30s, he had established himself as a rising star at a financial company. His colleagues admired his sharp analytical mind, and his clients appreciated his no-nonsense approach to wealth management. Margot Sinclair, as she was known before her marriage, had a different trajectory. The daughter of a college professor and an artist, she grew up in a household that valued creativity and self-expression. She studied modern dance at the university, dreaming of a career on stage. However, a knee injury in her senior year derailed those plans, leading her to pivot towards yoga and wellness coaching. Their paths crossed at a charity gala in 2003. Thaddeus, already successful but lacking in social graces, was immediately drawn to Margot's vivacity and charm. For Margot, Thaddeus represented stability and the promise of a comfortable life that would allow her to pursue her passions without financial worry. They married a year later in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. The early years of their marriage were happy ones. Thaddeus's career continued to flourish, and he took pride in providing Margot with the life he felt she deserved. Margot, for her part, threw herself into being the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and attending social events that were crucial for Thaddeus's networking. She also began teaching yoga part-time at an upscale studio, finding fulfillment in helping others achieve balance and inner peace. But as the years wore on, cracks began to appear in their carefully constructed life. Thaddeus's work hours grew longer, his ambition pushing him to chase ever bigger deals and clients. He was rarely home before 9 p.m., and even when he was physically present, his mind was often elsewhere, constantly checking his phone for emails or market updates. Margot, approaching her 40s, found herself increasingly restless. The yoga classes and charity committees that once filled her days now felt hollow. She began to question the choices that had led her to this point, wondering if she had traded her dreams for a gilded cage. The couple's failure to conceive, despite years of trying, added another layer of strain to their relationship. By the summer of 2019, the Hendersons' marriage was a carefully maintained facade. To the outside world, they still appeared to be the golden couple. Thaddeus continued to excel at work, recently closing a deal that put him in line for a partnership. Margot's yoga classes were more popular than ever, her students drawn to her warmth and apparent serenity. But behind closed doors they were virtual strangers. Conversations, when they happened, were perfunctory and centered around schedules and social obligations. Physical intimacy had become a rare occurrence, each touch laden with unspoken resentments and unfulfilled expectations. Neither Thaddeus nor Margot was willing to admit, even to themselves, how far they had drifted apart. It was easier to maintain the illusion, to go through the motions of a happy marriage, than to confront the emptiness that had grown between them. Little did they know that this unacknowledged chasm in their relationship was about to become the catalyst for a tragedy that would shatter not just their lives, but the entire community of Riverside. The Coopers had moved into the house next door to the Hendersons in 2014, following the death of Elaine Cooper's husband, Dr. Reginald Cooper, a respected oncologist. Reginald had succumbed to the very disease he had spent his life fighting, leaving Elaine to raise their son Liam alone. Elaine, a soft-spoken librarian, had initially struggled to adjust to life in the new community. The move from their modest home in St. Paul had been necessary to escape the memories that haunted every corner of their old house. But the affluent suburb felt alien to her. She found solace in her books and in tending to the garden that soon became the envy of the neighborhood. Liam Cooper was 14 when they moved in, a lanky, introverted teenager more comfortable with computers than with people. The transition to a new school had been difficult, and he often found himself the target of bullies who mocked his second-hand clothes and quiet demeanor. It was during this time that Thaddeus Henderson had taken Liam under his wing, offering him a job mowing lawns and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. Over the next 5 years, Liam had blossomed. The awkward teen grew into a handsome young man, his natural intelligence finally finding an outlet in his computer science studies at the university. Despite his growing confidence, Liam remained devoted to his mother. He worried about her isolation and loneliness, and made a point of coming home most weekends, even when his friends were planning parties or road trips. It was on one of these weekend visits in early June that he first encountered Margot Henderson in a new light. Elaine had always been grateful for the Hendersons' kindness, particularly Margot's efforts to include her in neighborhood activities. She often spoke of Margot's generosity, unaware of the complex emotions brewing beneath the surface of her son's polite nods. The spark that ignited the affair between Margot Henderson and Liam Cooper was as unexpected as it was intense. It happened on a balmy evening in early June, during one of the Hendersons' legendary summer barbecues. Thaddeus, as usual, was holding court near the grill, regaling his colleagues with tales of his latest financial coup. Margot, feeling particularly isolated amidst the crowd, had retreated to the relative quiet of the pool house to replenish the ice bucket. Liam, who had been reluctantly dragged to the party by his mother, chose that moment to seek refuge from the noise and forced socializing. He entered the pool house not realizing it was occupied and found Margot struggling with a large bag of ice. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something shifted. He moved to help her with the ice, their hands brushing. They stood there, momentarily frozen, the cold of the ice contrasting sharply with the heat building between them. It was Margot who broke the silence, her voice husky as she thanked him. Liam, usually so articulate, found himself stammering in response. That brief encounter set the stage for what was to come. Over the next few weeks, Margot and Liam found themselves manufacturing reasons to be in each other's company. It started innocently enough, Margot asking Liam for help with her laptop, Liam offering to help in her garden. Each interaction was charged with an undercurrent of attraction that they both tried to ignore. Their first kiss happened almost a month after the barbecue. Liam had been helping Margot set up for one of her yoga classes in the park. As they finished, a sudden summer storm broke out. They ran for shelter under a nearby gazebo, laughing and breathless. As the rain poured down around them, Margot looked at Liam and felt a surge of desire she hadn't experienced in years. Before she could think better of it, she leaned in and kissed him. From that point, their affair escalated quickly. They were reckless, driven by a combination of Liam's youthful passion and Margot's desperation to feel alive again. They met in secluded spots around town, in the back row of the local cinema, in a hidden corner of the public library, and, most dangerously, in the Henderson home when Thaddeus was at work. Each encounter left them craving more, the gulf in their ages forgotten in the heat of their stolen moments. Margot felt rejuvenated, rediscovering parts of herself she thought long lost. Liam, for his part, was intoxicated by Margot's experience and the taboo nature of their relationship. But as the summer wore on, the strain of maintaining their secret began to show. Close calls became more frequent, a neighbor almost catching them in an embrace, a suspicious glance from Elaine when Margot's name came up too often in conversation. The guilt, too, started to weigh on them both. Liam struggled with the knowledge that he was betraying Thaddeus, a man who had been nothing but kind to him. Margot found herself lying more and more to her husband, each deception another crack in the foundation of her marriage. Yet despite the risks and the guilt, neither seemed able to end the affair. They were caught in a whirlwind of passion and need, blind to the devastating consequences that loomed on the horizon. July 15, 2019, dawned hot and humid, the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. It was a Monday, and Riverside stirred to life as its residents prepared for another week of work and routine. For Thaddeus Henderson, it began like any other day. He rose early, donned one of his impeccably tailored suits, and left for the office before Margot had even stirred from sleep. Margot woke later, her mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. Thaddeus had informed her the night before that he would be working late, a crucial client dinner that could seal his partnership deal. For Margot, this meant an opportunity. She sent a text to Liam, her heart racing as she suggested he come over in the afternoon. Liam, who had been agonizing over the affair for days, saw the message as a chance to end things face to face. He replied with a simple, "Okay," resolving to break it off before the situation spiraled further out of control. The day passed slowly for both of them. Margot went through the motions of her morning yoga class, her usual serenity replaced by a nervous energy that her students couldn't help but notice. Liam, at his summer job, found it hard to focus on the lines of code on his screen, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Margot and the conversation to come. At 2:30 p.m., Liam made his way next door, glancing furtively around to ensure none of the neighbors were watching. Margot ushered him in quickly, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. It was Liam who broke the silence, starting to say that they needed to talk. But Margot, misreading his intention and driven by a desperate need to feel desired, cut him off with a passionate kiss. Despite his reservations, Liam found himself responding, his resolve weakening in the face of Margot's intensity. What happened next was a blur of discarded clothes and tangled limbs. As they made their way to the master bedroom, all thoughts of ending the affair were temporarily forgotten as they lost themselves in each other. Meanwhile, across town, Thaddeus Henderson sat in his office frowning at his computer screen. The numbers for the client presentation weren't adding up, and he knew he'd have to redo a significant portion of his work. Frustration mounting, he made a snap decision. He would go home, regroup, and return to the office later to finish up before the dinner. At 3:45 p.m., Thaddeus's car pulled into the driveway. He noticed Liam Cooper's beat-up Honda parked a little way down the street, but thought nothing of it. Probably helping Elaine with some errand, he mused as he unlocked the front door. The house was quiet as Thaddeus entered, but something felt off. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table, unusual for Margot at this hour. Then he heard it, a muffled sound coming from upstairs. Frowning, he climbed the stairs, the noise growing louder as he approached the master bedroom. What Thaddeus saw when he opened the door would be forever seared into his memory. His wife, the woman he had loved for 15 years, was in their bed with Liam Cooper, the 19-year-old guy he had mentored and trusted. Then, with a roar of rage and pain, Thaddeus lunged forward. His hands, so used to manipulating numbers and shaking on business deals, now curled into fists as he grabbed Liam, yanking him off the bed. Margot screamed, scrambling to cover herself and separate the two men, but her efforts were in vain. Thaddeus's first punch caught Liam squarely in the jaw, sending the younger man stumbling backward. But Liam, driven by adrenaline and fear, fought back. The two men grappled, crashing into the dresser, sending framed photos and trinkets scattering across the floor. In the chaos, no one noticed the heavy crystal bookend that fell from the dresser's top. No one saw it until Thaddeus, in a fit of blind rage, grabbed it and brought it down on Liam's head with a sickening thud. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. Liam crumpled to the floor, blood pooling rapidly around his motionless form. Margot's scream pierced the air as the full horror of what had just transpired hit them all. In that moment, as storm clouds gathered outside and sirens wailed in the distance, the lives of everyone involved changed irrevocably. The idyllic facade of Riverside had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The piercing wail of police sirens shattered the usual tranquility of the community. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains, curiosity mingling with apprehension, as squad cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt in front of the Henderson residence. The first officers on the scene were met with a tableau of horror that would haunt them for years to come. Inside, they found a shell-shocked Thaddeus Henderson, his hands covered in blood, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Margot barely clothed and hysterical. The room bore all the hallmarks of a violent struggle: overturned furniture, shattered glass, and smears of blood on the hardwood floor. Detective Ava Rossi, a veteran of the police department's homicide unit, took charge of the scene. Her first priority was securing medical attention for Liam Cooper. As paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize him, Rossi began the delicate process of piecing together the events that had led to this tragedy. Thaddeus, still in a state of shock, was taken into custody without resistance. Margot was separately questioned. Their stories, fragmented and emotional, painted a picture of a long simmering marital discord that had exploded into violence. As word spread through the neighborhood, a crowd began to gather at the police cordon. Among them was Elaine Cooper, who collapsed in grief when informed of her son's critical condition. She was quickly whisked away to the hospital, where Liam was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. The investigation moved quickly. Forensics teams combed through the Henderson home, collecting evidence and taking photographs. The crystal bookend, now a potential murder weapon, was carefully bagged and tagged. Neighbors were interviewed, their statements adding context to the relationships between the Hendersons and the Coopers. One neighbor recalled hearing raised voices from the Henderson house earlier that afternoon, but had dismissed it as a television playing too loudly. Another mentioned seeing Liam enter the Henderson home around 2:30 p.m., noting it because he thought it odd given Thaddeus's usual work schedule. As night fell, the gravity of the situation became clear. Liam Cooper was pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m., never having regained consciousness. The charge against Thaddeus Henderson was elevated from assault to second-degree murder. In the days that followed, more details emerged. Margot, racked with guilt and facing intense scrutiny, admitted to the affair with Liam. Her statement, given through tears at the police station, provided a timeline of their relationship and the events leading up to that fateful afternoon. Thaddeus, advised by his hastily retained attorney, remained silent, but his colleagues at the company painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, working long hours in pursuit of a partnership that had seemed within reach. None, however, had suspected the depth of his marital problems or the capacity for violence that had been unleashed. The case against Thaddeus Henderson was building, but Rossi knew that in the court of public opinion, there would be no clear villains or heroes in this story. Only victims, each in their own way, of the secrets and lies that had finally come to light in the most devastating manner possible. For no one has ever expected the plot twist that's about to come. And twist that will shock everyone, including the Hendersons. The Henderson trial began on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the events that had shaken Riverside to its core. The county courthouse, a stately building of red brick and white columns, was surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the tension was palpable as the judge called the court to order. Prosecuting attorney Veronica Talbot, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, laid out the state's case in her opening statement. She painted a vivid picture of Thaddeus Henderson as a man consumed by rage and jealousy, who had brutally murdered a young man in the prime of his life. Talbot's words were measured but impactful, her gaze sweeping across the jury as she promised to prove Henderson's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Defense attorney countered with a narrative of his own. He portrayed Thaddeus as a devoted husband and pillar of the community, pushed to the brink by a betrayal of the deepest kind. Sterling suggested that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts testified about blood spatter patterns and the force required to cause Liam's fatal injury. Neighbors recounted the events of that day, and character witnesses spoke to the personalities and reputations of both Thaddeus and Liam. But it was Margot Henderson's testimony that captivated the courtroom. Over 2 grueling days on the stand, she laid bare the disintegration of her marriage and the evolution of her relationship with Liam. Her voice trembled as she described the moment Thaddeus had walked in on them and the horror of watching the confrontation unfold. Under cross-examination, Sterling tried to paint her as an unfaithful wife whose actions had driven her husband to temporary insanity. But Margot held firm, accepting her part in the tragedy while insisting that nothing justified Liam's death. Elaine Cooper's testimony was brief but powerful. Still grief-stricken, she spoke of her son's kindness and his dreams for the future, all cut short in an act of violence. Her quiet dignity in the face of unimaginable loss moved many in the courtroom to tears. As the trial neared its end, all eyes turned to Thaddeus Henderson. Against his lawyer's advice, he chose to take the stand. His testimony was a study in contrasts, moments of apparent remorse interspersed with flashes of the anger that had led to Liam's death. He spoke of the pressure he'd been under at work, the growing distance in his marriage, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity. When describing the fight with Liam, Thaddeus claimed he had never intended to cause serious harm, that he had simply lost control. As the trial progressed, expert witnesses from the field of psychology were called to provide insight into the minds of those involved in the tragic events. Dr. Cho explained that Thaddeus's actions could be understood through the lens of what psychologists call intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by episodes of violent, aggressive behavior disproportionate to the situation. She pointed to Thaddeus's high-stress job, his unexpressed marital dissatisfaction, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity as contributing factors to his violent outburst. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Cho conceded that while these factors could explain Thaddeus's behavior, they did not excuse it. She emphasized that many individuals face similar stressors without resorting to violence. The defense called a specialist in marriage and family therapy to testify about the psychological impact of infidelity. Friedman described the profound sense of betrayal and loss of identity that a person may experience upon discovering a spouse's affair. He likened it to a form of psychological trauma, capable of triggering extreme emotional responses. The psychological analyses presented during the trial offered a complex picture of human behavior and motivation. They highlighted how a combination of personal history, societal expectations, and immediate circumstances can collide to create a perfect storm of tragedy. After 7 grueling weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the fate of Thaddeus Henderson rested in the hands of the jury. As Judge Blackwell sent the 12 men and women to deliberate, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. After a short recess to consider all factors, Judge Blackwell returned to deliver her sentence. Citing the violent nature of the crime balanced against Thaddeus's lack of prior criminal history and the unique circumstances of the case, she sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. As Thaddeus was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of the tragedy seemed to descend upon the courtroom. There were no victors here, only lives irrevocably altered by a moment of passion and a split second of violence. Outside, as news of the verdict spread, the crowd's reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others argued the sentence was too harsh or too lenient. But all agreed on one thing: the events that had unfolded in Riverside would leave an indelible mark on the community for years to come. On the morning of September 15, 2019, the body of Sydney Watkins, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher, was discovered in her modest 2-bedroom home. The scene was gruesome, with clear signs of a struggle and multiple stab wounds marring Sydney's body. As detectives combed through the evidence, a chilling story began to emerge, one of a divorce gone wrong, a custody battle spiraling out of control, and a father driven to the unthinkable. At the center of this tragedy was Zendaya Thornton, the 8-year-old daughter of Sydney Watkins and Mark Thornton. Zendaya, a bright and vivacious child, had become the unwitting prize in a tug-of-war between her parents. What started as a mutual decision to end an unhappy marriage had devolved into a bitter feud, with both parties fighting tooth and nail for primary custody of their only child. Mark Thornton was born on July 12, 1982, in Hartford, Connecticut, the only child of Robert and Linda Thornton. From an early age, Mark showed signs of a driven and competitive nature, excelling in both academics and sports. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic childhood lay a darker reality. Robert Thornton was a strict disciplinarian with a volatile temper, often subjecting young Mark to harsh punishments for minor infractions. Linda, though loving, was passive in the face of her husband's outbursts, leaving Mark to navigate a household where success was demanded and failure was met with anger. As Mark grew older, he internalized his father's perfectionist tendencies and explosive temper. He developed a persona of confidence and charm, but those close to him noted an underlying insecurity and a need for control. Sydney Watkins came from a starkly different background. Born on March 3, 1984, in New Haven, Connecticut, she was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit, working-class family. Her father, James, was a carpenter, and her mother, Mary, worked part-time as a librarian. Despite their modest means, the Watkins household was filled with love, laughter, and a strong emphasis on education and community service. Growing up, Sydney was known for her kind heart and empathetic nature. She excelled in school, particularly in subjects related to literature and social studies. Her passion for helping others led her to pursue a degree in education at Southern Connecticut State University. Sydney's gentle demeanor and patience made her a natural with children. She volunteered at local youth centers throughout college and, upon graduation, secured a position as a second-grade teacher at an elementary school. Mark and Sydney's paths crossed in the summer of 2008 at a mutual friend's wedding. Mark, then a rising star at his law firm, was immediately drawn to Sydney's warmth and authenticity, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the cutthroat world he inhabited daily. Sydney, in turn, was charmed by Mark's confidence and ambition, seeing in him a drive that complemented her more laid-back nature. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance. Mark swept Sydney off her feet with grand gestures and lavish dates, while Sydney introduced Mark to the simple joys of home-cooked meals and quiet evenings spent in meaningful conversation. After a year of dating, Mark proposed during a surprise weekend getaway to Sydney's vineyard. Sydney, deeply in love and envisioning a future filled with happiness and stability, joyfully accepted. The couple wed in a lavish ceremony in the spring of 2010, with both sides of the family coming together to celebrate what everyone believed would be a long and happy union. The first few years of Mark and Sydney's marriage were, by all accounts, blissful. They purchased a charming home in Oak Ridge, settling into domestic life with enthusiasm. Mark's career continued to flourish, while Sydney found fulfillment in her teaching and in creating a warm, inviting home for the couple. However, as time passed, small cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect facade. Mark's work hours grew longer, and his stress levels increased as he pursued partnership at his firm. Sydney, while supportive, began to feel neglected and lonely. On April 17, 2011, Zendaya Thornton was born, bringing a renewed sense of joy and purpose to Mark and Sydney's lives. Mark, initially apprehensive about fatherhood given his own complicated relationship with his father, found himself utterly devoted to his daughter. He would spend hours reading to her, playing with her, and planning for her future. As Zendaya approached school age, the differences between Mark and Sydney became more pronounced. These differences led to frequent arguments, with each parent believing they knew what was best for their daughter. By the time Zendaya was 6 years old, the strain on Mark and Sydney's marriage had reached a breaking point. The constant arguments, lack of emotional intimacy, and fundamental disagreements about parenting had eroded the love that once bound them together. The divorce proceedings began in January 2018, and what started as an amicable separation quickly turned contentious. Mark, feeling betrayed and fearing the loss of control over his family, hired Gregory Patel, a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney. Sydney, overwhelmed by the sudden hostility, turned to her college friend Rachel Goldstein, a family law attorney known for her compassionate approach. The legal battle that ensued was bitter and protracted. Mark contested every aspect of the divorce, from the division of assets to the custody arrangements. He accused Sydney of being an unfit mother, citing her lack of ambition and permissive parenting style as reasons why he should have primary custody of Zendaya. Sydney, in turn, presented evidence of Mark's controlling behavior and volatile temper, arguing that his parenting style was detrimental to Zendaya's emotional well-being. The proceedings dragged on for months, draining both parties financially and emotionally. After nearly a year of legal wrangling, the court finally issued its ruling in November 2018. Taking into account Zendaya's age, her established routine, and the testimonies of various experts, the judge awarded joint legal custody to both parents. However, Sydney was granted primary physical custody, with Mark receiving generous visitation rights, including every other weekend and one weeknight dinner. This arrangement, while seemingly fair, left Mark feeling defeated and resentful. He viewed the decision as a personal failure and a threat to his relationship with Zendaya. Unbeknownst to Sydney or the court, this custody ruling would set in motion a series of events that would lead to tragedy. In the months following the divorce settlement, Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic and hostile. He began to obsessively document every interaction with Sydney, looking for any perceived misstep or violation of the custody agreement. His communications with her, once civil if tense, devolved into a barrage of accusatory emails and text messages. Mark's visitations with Zendaya became a source of constant conflict. He would return her late, change plans at the last minute, or attempt to schedule extra time without consulting Sydney. During handovers, he would often make snide remarks about Sydney's parenting, or try to manipulate Zendaya into saying she wanted to spend more time with him. At work, Mark's performance began to suffer as he focused more and more on finding ways to regain control over his family situation. Colleagues noticed his shortened temper and distracted demeanor, with some expressing concern about his mental state. Mark's boss, noticing the decline in his work quality, suggested he take some time off to sort out his personal issues. This only served to fuel Mark's paranoia, convincing him that everyone was conspiring against him. Sydney, deeply concerned about the impact of Mark's behavior on Zendaya, did her best to shield their daughter from the growing tension. She maintained a calm demeanor during handovers, redirected Zendaya's attention when Mark made inappropriate comments, and tried to ensure that Zendaya's time with her father remained positive. Privately, Sydney sought advice from her attorney and Zendaya's pediatrician on how to handle the situation. She began keeping a detailed log of Mark's behavior, documenting late returns, inappropriate comments, and any signs of emotional distress in Zendaya following visits with her father. Sydney also enrolled Zendaya in play therapy sessions with child psychologist Dr. Lisa Martinez, hoping to provide Zendaya with a safe space to process her feelings about the divorce and her father's changing behavior. Despite her efforts to keep things amicable for Zendaya's sake, Sydney found herself increasingly fearful of Mark's unpredictable moods. She installed a security system in their home and informed Zendaya's school about the situation, requesting that they not release Zendaya to Mark outside of his designated pickup times. Sydney also reached out to her brother Michael, asking him to be present during handovers when possible, hoping that a witness might temper Mark's hostility. As the conflict between her parents escalated, Zendaya's sunny disposition began to dim. Once outgoing and confident, she became withdrawn at school, often sitting alone at lunch or refusing to participate in group activities. Her teacher noticed a decline in Zendaya's academic performance and an increase in anxiety-related behaviors, such as nail-biting and hair-twirling. At home with Sydney, Zendaya became clingy and prone to emotional outbursts. She would often wake up with nightmares, calling out for both her parents. Sydney would find her daughter in tears, confused and upset by the conflicting loyalties she felt. Zendaya's play therapy sessions revealed a child torn between love for both parents and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. In early August 2019, Mark filed a motion for modification of the custody agreement, seeking primary physical custody of Zendaya. His petition cited Sydney's alleged parental alienation and claimed that Zendaya was flourishing under his care while regressing when with her mother. Sydney, armed with documentation of Mark's erratic behavior and reports from Zendaya's therapist, filed a counter-motion requesting supervised visitation for Mark. The court scheduled a hearing for September 20th, giving both parties just over a month to prepare their cases. This impending legal showdown ratcheted up the tension between Mark and Sydney to unprecedented levels. Mark became obsessed with winning the case, viewing it as his last chance to assert control over his family. Sydney, meanwhile, grew increasingly anxious about the possibility of losing custody of Zendaya, fearing for her daughter's emotional well-being if placed primarily in Mark's care. As the hearing date approached, Mark's grip on reality began to slip. He stopped showing up to work, using all his time to build his case against Sydney. His apartment became a chaotic mess of legal documents, photos of Zendaya, and scribbled notes detailing perceived slights and conspiracy theories. Mark's few remaining friends tried to reach out, concerned by his disheveled appearance and rambling phone calls, but he pushed them away, accusing them of siding with Sydney. Mark's paranoia reached new heights. He became convinced that Sydney was poisoning Zendaya against him and that the entire legal system was corrupt. He started following Sydney and Zendaya, taking photos of their activities and interpreting innocent interactions as evidence of Sydney's unfitness as a mother. In his distorted thinking, Mark began to see himself as Zendaya's savior, the only one who could protect her from Sydney's harmful influence. During this time, Mark's interactions with Zendaya became increasingly disturbing. He would interrogate her about Sydney's activities, make disparaging comments about her mother, and fill her head with promises of a better life once he won custody. Zendaya, confused and frightened by her father's intensity, began to resist visits, clinging to Sydney and begging not to go with Mark. 3 days before the scheduled custody hearing, Mark reached his breaking point. After a particularly difficult handover where Zendaya cried and refused to go with him, Mark became convinced that Sydney had turned his daughter against him completely. In his delusional state, he concluded that the upcoming hearing was rigged, that he would never receive a fair judgment, and that Sydney would always find a way to keep Zendaya from him. It was at this moment, alone in his cluttered apartment surrounded by the detritus of his obsession, that Mark made the fateful decision to take matters into his own hands. In his twisted logic, he reasoned that the only way to ensure he would have custody of Zendaya was to eliminate Sydney from the equation entirely. With cold determination, Mark began to plan the unthinkable, the murder of his ex-wife. In the early hours of September 15, 2019, Mark set his plan into motion. He had spent the previous 2 days meticulously preparing, his legal mind perversely applied to the task of committing and concealing a murder. He chose a Sunday, knowing Sydney would be home alone while Zendaya was at a sleepover with her maternal grandparents. Mark packed a bag containing a hunting knife he had purchased with cash at a sporting goods store 2 towns over. He also included rope, duct tape, and cleaning supplies, having researched methods to eliminate evidence. To establish an alibi, Mark had set up his home computer to make online purchases and send emails throughout the night and morning. He had also left his cell phone at home, connected to the Wi-Fi to create a digital footprint, suggesting he never left his apartment. At 4:30 a.m., Mark left his apartment, careful to avoid security cameras and potential witnesses. He drove a rental car, paid for with a prepaid credit card, to a spot a few blocks from Sydney's house. From there, he proceeded on foot, his heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. Mark arrived at Sydney's house just before dawn. Using a copy of the house key he had secretly made during a previous visit, he silently entered. The house was quiet, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. Mark crept up the stairs, the knife clutched tightly in his hand. He paused outside Sydney's bedroom. He pushed open the door to find Sydney still asleep. The sound roused her and she sat up, confusion quickly turning to terror as she recognized Mark's figure in the dim light. "Sydney, what are you doing to my daughter?" Mark's voice was low and menacing. Sydney scrambled out of bed, her voice shaking as she tried to reason with him. But Mark was beyond reason. He lunged forward, grabbing Sydney's arm as she attempted to run past him. She fought back fiercely. They struggled, crashing into furniture and knocking items off shelves. Sydney managed to break free momentarily. Running towards the hallway, Mark pursued her, his face contorted with rage. In the hallway, he caught up to her, tackling her to the ground. Sydney continued to fight, scratching and kicking, leaving defensive wounds that would later become crucial evidence. In a frenzy of violence, Mark brought the knife down repeatedly. Sydney's screams were cut short as the blade found its mark. Again and again, the hallway walls, once adorned with happy family photos, were now splattered with blood. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. Mark stood over Sydney's lifeless body, his rage giving way to shock as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. The knife slipped from his blood-soaked hands, clattering to the floor. He rushed to retrieve his bag of supplies, frantically trying to clean up the worst of the blood. In his haste and shock, Mark made critical mistakes. He missed several blood spatters, left partial fingerprints, and failed to notice that in the struggle, Sydney had managed to grab of his hair. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Mark gathered his things and fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would ultimately lead to his downfall. At 8:30 a.m., Karen Mitchell, Sydney's close friend and fellow teacher, arrived at the house. They had plans to carpool to a teachers' conference that morning. When Sydney didn't answer the door, Karen used the spare key she knew was hidden under a flower pot. The moment Karen stepped inside, she knew something was terribly wrong. The house was eerily quiet, and there was a faint coppery smell in the air. She called out. As she climbed the stairs, she noticed smears on the wall that made her heart race. Karen's scream pierced the quiet Sunday morning when she discovered Sydney's body in the upstairs hallway. Trembling, she fumbled for her phone and dialed 911. "I think my friend has been murdered," she sobbed to the operator. "Oh God, there's so much blood." Within minutes, the peaceful suburban street was transformed into a chaotic crime scene. Police cars and ambulances crowded the driveway, their lights flashing silently in the morning sun. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching in shock as police tape went up around Sydney's home. The nightmare had only just begun. Detective Lisa Hawkins of the police department took charge of the investigation. With 15 years of experience in homicide cases, she immediately recognized the signs of a crime of passion. The brutality of the attack, the lack of forced entry, and the personal nature of the crime all pointed to someone close to the victim. As the forensics team combed through the house, collecting blood samples, fingerprints, and other trace evidence, Detective Hawkins began interviewing neighbors and friends. Karen Mitchell's statement about Sydney's contentious relationship with her ex-husband quickly made Mark Thornton the primary suspect. The investigation moved rapidly. A search warrant was obtained for Mark's apartment, where detectives found a disturbing shrine to Zendaya and Sydney, walls covered with photos and legal documents. Mark's computer revealed his obsessive research into custody laws and, more damning, methods of committing untraceable murder. Meanwhile, the forensics team made crucial discoveries at the crime scene. Despite Mark's attempts to clean up, they found his DNA under Sydney's fingernails and matched the hair Sydney had grabbed to Mark's genetic profile. Partial fingerprints found in the house were also consistent with Mark's. As the evidence mounted, Detective Hawkins knew they needed to move quickly. Mark Thornton had become not just a suspect, but a potentially dangerous fugitive who might attempt to reach his daughter. Unaware that he was already the prime suspect, Mark attempted to establish his alibi. He returned to his apartment, showered, and meticulously cleaned his clothes and shoes. He then made several calls, including one to Sydney's phone, leaving a message asking about picking up Zendaya later that day. Mark then went to a local coffee shop, making sure to be seen by the staff and engaging in conversation with other patrons. He even called the police himself later that afternoon, expressing concern that he couldn't reach Sydney. However, Mark's careful planning began to unravel almost immediately. A neighbor had noticed the unfamiliar rental car parked near Sydney's house in the early morning hours. The car rental company confirmed that Mark had rented the vehicle using a prepaid card, a detail he had overlooked in his haste to remove the car from the scene. The trial of Mark Thornton began 6 months after Sydney's murder. The prosecution presented a compelling case built on both forensic evidence and a disturbing psychological profile of the defendant. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence found at the crime scene, including the hairs matched to Mark and the blood spatter patterns consistent with the prosecution's account of the murder. The rental car evidence was also presented, along with security camera footage, showing a figure matching Mark's description near Sydney's house on the morning of the crime. Detective Hawkins took the stand, detailing the investigation and the mounting evidence that led to Mark's arrest. She presented Mark's computer searches in the shrine found in his apartment, painting a picture of a man obsessed and spiraling out of control. A parade of witnesses took the stand, each adding to the portrait of a tragedy years in the making. Zendaya's teachers testified about the child's increasing anxiety and behavioral issues, which they attributed to the high-conflict divorce. Sydney's friends and colleagues spoke of her fear of Mark and her efforts to protect Zendaya from the escalating tension. Mark's defense team attempted to paint a picture of a loving father, driven to desperation by a biased court system and a vindictive ex-wife. They suggested that Sydney had been the one alienating Zendaya from her father, causing Mark's mental state to deteriorate. The defense also tried to cast doubt on the forensic evidence, suggesting that the crime scene had been contaminated and that the DNA evidence was inconclusive. They presented character witnesses who spoke of Mark's previous reputation as a dedicated father and successful lawyer. However, their efforts were largely overshadowed by the mountain of evidence against Mark and his own erratic behavior during the trial. After a 3-week trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, broken only by a muffled sob from Mark's mother. Mark, given the opportunity to speak, showed little remorse. In a rambling statement, he continued to blame Sydney and the court system for his actions, claiming he had only wanted to protect his daughter. The judge delivered a scathing rebuke before announcing the sentence. "Mr. Thornton, your actions have not only taken a life but have irrevocably damaged your daughter, the very person you claimed to be protecting. You have displayed a shocking lack of empathy and an inability to put your child's needs before your own desires." She then sentenced Mark Thornton to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. In the years following the trial, Zendaya Thornton remained in the care of her maternal grandparents. With ongoing therapy and support, she slowly began to heal from the trauma of losing both parents in such a tragic manner. The case led to reforms in the family court system, with increased resources allocated for mental health evaluations and support services for high-conflict divorces. Sydney Watkins' memory lived on through a foundation established in her name, dedicated to supporting children affected by domestic violence. As for Mark Thornton, he spends his days in a maximum security prison, his attempts at appeal repeatedly denied, forever marked as the man who destroyed his family in a misguided attempt to keep it together. On October 15, 2021, police responded to a distress call from an apartment complex on Oak Street. What they discovered inside would haunt them for years to come. The lifeless body of 32-year-old Ethan Reed, a beloved local high school teacher, lying in a pool of his own blood. The prime suspect? His girlfriend of 2 years, 29-year-old software engineer Olivia Rogan. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a disturbing web of surveillance, manipulation, and escalating control that had ensnared Ethan in the months leading up to his death. Hidden cameras, meticulously placed throughout his apartment, told a silent tale of paranoia and obsession. Olivia Rogan's path to becoming the central figure in a tragic true crime story began long before she met Ethan Reed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia grew up in a middle-class suburb of Portland. From an early age, those close to the family noted Olivia's intense need for attention and validation. Margaret Rogan, in an interview following her daughter's arrest, reflected on Olivia's childhood. She was an exceptionally bright child, always at the top of her class, but she struggled to form lasting friendships. Margaret recalled, "I thought it was just shyness at first, but as she got older I noticed how possessive she could be of the few friends she did make. If they spent time with other children, Olivia would become sullen and withdrawn." This pattern continued into Olivia's teenage years. Her high school boyfriend, Alex Chen, later told investigators about Olivia's constant need to know his whereabouts. "She would call or text incessantly when we weren't together," he said. "If I didn't respond quickly enough, she'd show up wherever she thought I might be. At the time, I thought it was just because she cared so much." Despite these interpersonal challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. It was here that Olivia's controlling tendencies found a new outlet in the world of technology. Her college roommate, Sarah Jennings, remembered Olivia's fascination with coding and surveillance software. "She was brilliant at it," Sarah said, "but sometimes it felt like she was using her skills to keep tabs on everyone around her. She'd casually mention things about our classmates that she couldn't possibly have known without some kind of digital snooping." After graduating with honors, Olivia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her colleagues described her as driven and meticulous, often working long hours to perfect her code. However, her personal life continued to be marked by tumultuous, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, who dated Olivia for 6 months in 2019, described the relationship as intense and suffocating. "She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans," he said. "When I tried to set boundaries, she'd become angry or manipulative. It was exhausting." By the time Olivia moved back to Ashland in early 2020, accepting a remote position with her company, she had left a trail of broken relationships behind her. Yet those who knew her couldn't have predicted the dark turn her life would take when she met Ethan Reed. Ethan Reed's life stood in stark contrast to Olivia's tumultuous journey. Born in 1990 in Ashland, Ethan was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. His older sister, Amanda Reed, described their childhood as idyllic. "We grew up surrounded by nature, spending our summers hiking in the mountains and our winters skiing. Ethan was always the peacemaker, the one who could make anyone laugh." From an early age, Ethan showed a passion for learning and a natural ability to connect with others. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him fondly. "Ethan had a way of bringing out the best in his classmates. He was patient, kind, and had an infectious enthusiasm for literature. I always thought he'd make an excellent teacher someday." Mrs. Hoffman's prediction proved accurate. After graduating from the university with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. Ethan's personal life was characterized by steady, long-term relationships. His college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, remained a close friend even after their amicable breakup. "Ethan was always so balanced," she said. "He valued his independence, but was also incredibly loyal and supportive. We broke up because our career paths were taking us in different directions, but there was never any drama." The fateful meeting between Olivia Rogan and Ethan Reed occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May 2020 at a local farmer's market. Olivia, still adjusting to life, had ventured out to explore her new surroundings. Ethan, a regular at the market, was picking up fresh produce for the week. Their eyes met across a display of organic apples, and Ethan, ever the friendly local, struck up a conversation about the best varieties for baking. Olivia, charmed by his easygoing nature and warm smile, found herself lingering at the stall far longer than she'd intended. As they chatted, they discovered a shared love of classic literature and hiking. Ethan, impressed by Olivia's quick wit and intelligence, suggested they meet up for a hike the following weekend. Olivia, feeling an instant connection, eagerly agreed. Their first date was a hike up to Grizzly Peak, offering breathtaking views of the Rogue Valley. Ethan's friend Mark later recalled, Ethan came back from that hike on cloud nine. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Olivia was, how they'd talked for hours without a lull in the conversation. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Ethan's relationship blossomed rapidly. They spent long evenings discussing books, sharing meals, and exploring the natural beauty of southern area. To those around them, they seemed like a perfect match. However, even in these early honeymoon days of their relationship, there were subtle signs of Olivia's possessive nature. Ethan's sister Amanda noticed that Olivia seemed to monopolize his time. She'd call or text constantly when they weren't together, and she always seemed to have a reason why Ethan couldn't join family gatherings without her. Ethan, blinded by the excitement of new love, brushed off these early red flags. When his friend Mark expressed concern about the intensity of the relationship, Ethan laughed it off. "She's just excited about us," he said. "It'll calm down once we're more settled." Little did Ethan know that this was just the beginning of a pattern that would gradually tighten around him, slowly cutting him off from the life he had built and the people who cared about him most. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had all but moved into Ethan's apartment. Despite him never officially asking her to live with him, she began to exert influence over every aspect of his daily life, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. Ethan's colleague and friend, fellow English teacher Jessica Lawson, noticed changes in his behavior at work. He started turning down invitations to after-school happy hours, something he'd always enjoyed before. When I asked him about it, he said Olivia wasn't comfortable with him being out late, Jessica recalled. It seemed odd, given that she knew most of us and had even joined us a few times. Olivia's control extended to Ethan's social media presence. Friends noticed that his usually active Facebook and Instagram accounts became sparse, with posts becoming infrequent and impersonal. When questioned, Ethan would brush it off, saying he was trying to be more private online. But it was Olivia's attempts to isolate Ethan from his family that raised the most alarm bells. Amanda Reed remembered a particularly disturbing incident during the 2020 holiday season. "We always have a big family Christmas at our parents' house," she said. For that year, Ethan called at the last minute to say he and Olivia couldn't make it. When I pressed him, he said Olivia wasn't feeling well and he needed to stay with her. But I could hear her in the background, sounding perfectly fine. Olivia employed a variety of emotional manipulation tactics to maintain her grip on Ethan. She would oscillate between lavishing him with affection and subjecting him to cold, silent treatments if he didn't comply with her wishes. Ethan's friend Mark recounted a camping trip they had planned for months. "The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel. He sounded so defeated. He said Olivia was upset he was going away without her, even though she'd been invited and had declined." As 2021 progressed, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity, despite having no evidence to support her claims. She would show up unannounced at the high school, ostensibly to bring Ethan lunch. But colleagues noted how she seemed to be scanning the room, as if looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. Ethan's student Emma Chen later testified to a disturbing encounter. "Ms. Rogan came into our classroom during lunch break. Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us questions about him. It felt really weird and invasive." Despite the mounting evidence of Olivia's controlling behavior, Ethan remained committed to the relationship. Those close to him noted his increasing stress and anxiety, but he would deflect their concerns, often making excuses for Olivia's actions. His sister Amanda confronted him directly in the summer of 2021. "I told him I was worried, that this didn't seem like a healthy relationship," she said. But he just got defensive. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she'd been hurt in the past and needed extra reassurance. He truly believed he could help her overcome her insecurities. As Olivia's paranoia and need for control reached new heights, she made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of her relationship with Ethan and ultimately lead to its tragic conclusion. In late August 2021, while Ethan was away at a weekend teaching conference, Olivia took the drastic step of installing hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The idea had been brewing in Olivia's mind for weeks. Her background in software engineering made the technical aspects of the plan feasible, and her growing suspicions about Ethan's fidelity provided the justification she needed to overcome any moral qualms. Olivia meticulously planned the operation, purchasing small high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a potted plant. She also set up sophisticated software that would allow her to access the feeds remotely from her laptop or phone. On the Friday afternoon that Ethan left for his conference, Olivia sprang into action. She had a key to his apartment, ostensibly for emergencies, which gave her unfettered access. Over the next several hours, she carefully placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and even the bathroom, ensuring every corner of Ethan's private space was under surveillance. With the cameras in place and the software running smoothly, Olivia left the apartment, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself that this was a necessary step, that it would allay her fears and allow her to trust Ethan completely. The first few days of monitoring proved uneventful. Olivia watched as Ethan went about his daily routines, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting on the phone with his sister. But rather than easing her suspicions, the lack of incriminating evidence only fueled Olivia's paranoia. She began to obsess over minor details. Why did Ethan smile at that text message? Who was he waving to out the window? Olivia's colleague, David Cho, later recalled noticing changes in her behavior at work during this time. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. I caught a glimpse of her screen once. It looked like a video feed, but she quickly closed it when she saw me looking. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia's obsession with the camera feeds grew. She began neglecting her work, her sleep suffered, and her interactions with Ethan became increasingly strained as she struggled to keep her secret. One evening, while reaching for a book on his shelf, Ethan noticed that several volumes were slightly out of place. He distinctly remembered organizing them just days before. In the bathroom, his toiletries seemed rearranged, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly how. More unsettling were the times he felt as if he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in the living room and suddenly feel a prickle on the back of his neck, as if someone's eyes were on him. But when he looked up, he was alone. Ethan's friend and fellow teacher, Jessica Lawson, recalled a conversation they had during this period. He mentioned feeling on edge in his own home, she said. He laughed it off, saying he was probably just stressed about work, but I could tell it was really bothering him. Olivia's behavior added to Ethan's growing discomfort. She began making comments about his daily activities that she shouldn't have known about. Once, she mentioned in passing that she liked the new brand of coffee he'd bought, despite not having been to his apartment in days. Another time, she asked about a phone call he'd had with his mother, though he was certain he hadn't mentioned it to her. When Ethan would express confusion about these slip-ups, Olivia would quickly change the subject or provide vague explanations. He must have mentioned the coffee in passing, she'd say, or perhaps his mother had told her about the call. As his unease grew, Ethan found himself second-guessing his own memories and perceptions. Am I just being paranoid? He wondered. Is the stress of work getting to me? Despite his attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began to pay closer attention to his surroundings, noting any changes or oddities in his apartment. He even considered confiding in his sister Amanda, but hesitated, worried that his suspicions might sound absurd or that he might be overreacting. The moment of revelation came on an October evening in 2021. Ethan had been grading papers late into the night, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating the living room. As he stretched and prepared to call it a night, his elbow knocked a small potted plant off the side table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, soil and ceramic shards scattering across the room. As Ethan knelt to clean up the mess, something caught his eye amidst the debris. A tiny lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, glinted in the low light. His heart racing, Ethan carefully extracted the object from the soil. It was a miniature camera, expertly concealed within the plant's base. The discovery sent a chill down Ethan's spine. With trembling hands, he began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he uncovered 5 more hidden cameras. In the smoke detector, a picture frame, even the shower head. The realization that his most private moments had been under surveillance was overwhelming. Ethan's mind reeled as he pieced together the implications. The strange comments Olivia had made, her uncanny knowledge of his daily activities, The feeling of being watched. It all suddenly made horrifying sense. The woman he had loved and trusted had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible. In a daze, Ethan called the one person he knew he could trust implicitly, his sister Amanda. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, immediately alert at the sound of distress in her brother's voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. Through a voice choked with emotion, Ethan recounted his discovery. Amanda listened in shocked silence, her initial disbelief quickly turning to anger on her brother's behalf. As Ethan's story unfolded, Amanda's protective instincts kicked in. "You need to get out of there," she insisted. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Olivia immediately, to demand answers and explanations. Another part was simply numb with betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a gross invasion of privacy. In the end, it was Amanda's steady voice that guided his next actions. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras. Save any recordings you can find. We'll go to the police in the morning." As the first light of dawn broke over Ashland, Ethan sat on his couch, surrounded by the dismantled remains of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Good morning, babe. Sleep well?" The irony of her feigned normalcy was not lost on Ethan. With a deep breath, he typed out a response that would set in motion the final tragic act of their relationship. "We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The tension in Ethan's apartment was palpable as Olivia arrived later that morning. She entered with her usual smile, leaning in for a kiss, but froze when she saw Ethan's grim expression and the array of dismantled cameras on the coffee table. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she began, her voice quavering. But Ethan, his voice low and controlled, cut her off. He spoke of trust betrayed, of the sanctity of privacy violated. With each word, Olivia seemed to shrink, her usual confidence evaporating in the face of her exposed deception. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia launched into a desperate justification of her actions. She spoke of her deep-seated insecurities, her fear of losing him, her conviction that if she could just prove to herself that he was faithful, she could finally relax into their relationship. Her words came out in a rush, pleading and explanatory. But Ethan remained unmoved. "I can't be with someone who would do this," he said firmly. "We're done, Olivia. I want you to leave." Olivia's demeanor changed in an instant. Her tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard look. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're perfect together. You're overreacting." As Ethan stood firm in his decision, Olivia's pleas turned to threats. She spoke of ruining his career, of telling his students and colleagues about embarrassing moments she'd captured on camera. When these threats failed to sway Ethan, she resorted to emotional manipulation, threatening self-harm if he left her. Throughout it all, Ethan remained resolute. Even as his heart broke at the sight of Olivia's desperation, he knew with a clarity that surprised him that there was no coming back from this betrayal. Finally, seeing that her words were having no effect, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea that Olivia's desperation was about to take a far more dangerous turn. The events of October 15th, 2021, would forever be etched in the memories of Ashland's residents. The day began like any other, with no indication of the tragedy that would unfold. Ethan, emotionally drained from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning talking with his sister Amanda, making plans to file a police report about the hidden cameras. As evening approached, he decided to take a walk to clear his head, leaving his phone behind to avoid any desperate messages from Olivia. It was during this absence that Olivia made her final fatal return to Ethan's apartment. Neighbors would later report seeing her enter the building, her face set in a mask of determination. She used her key to let herself in, her mind racing with a mix of anger, desperation, and a twisted sense of righteous indignation. When Ethan returned home around 7 p.m., he found Olivia waiting for him in the darkened living room. The sight of her there, uninvited and unexpected, sent a jolt of fear through him. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice wary. Olivia's response was chilling in its calmness. "We're going to fix this, Ethan," she said. "You'll see that we belong together." What followed was a heated argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Olivia vacillated between pleading for another chance
and lashing out with bitter accusations. Ethan, his patience exhausted, demanded that she leave immediately. It was then that Olivia's fragile control snapped. In a move that would shock even those who knew of her obsessive tendencies, she produced a kitchen knife she had taken from Ethan's own drawer. The next few moments were a blur of violence and terror. Ethan, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, tried to reason with Olivia, even as he backed away from the blade. But Olivia, beyond the reach of reason, lunged forward. In the struggle that ensued, Ethan's training as a former high school wrestler came into play. He managed to grapple with Olivia, trying to disarm her without causing harm. But in her frenzied state, Olivia's strength seemed superhuman. Neighbors would later report hearing shouts and the sound of breaking glass. One, concerned by the commotion, called 911, but help would arrive too late. By the time police broke down the door of Ethan's apartment, the tragic scene had already played out to its grim conclusion. They found Ethan on the floor with multiple stab wounds marking his body, the life already fading from his eyes. Olivia sat beside him, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand, her gaze vacant as she stared at what she had done. As paramedics rushed in, futilely attempting to save Ethan's life, Olivia offered no resistance when the police took her into custody. Her only words, repeated over and over like a mantra, were, "He was supposed to love me forever." The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the full extent of Olivia's surveillance operation, revealing months of invasive monitoring. This digital trail, along with physical evidence from the crime scene and witness statements, painted a damning picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were devastated. His sister Amanda in particular struggled with guilt. "I knew something was wrong," she said in a tearful interview. "I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former colleagues and ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. Her parents, shell-shocked by their daughter's actions, could only offer tearful apologies to Ethan's family. The district attorney presented a methodical case, walking the jury through the progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. The recovered surveillance footage played a central role, starkly illustrating the invasion of Ethan's privacy. The defense didn't contest the basic facts of the case. Instead, they focused on Olivia's mental state, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that Olivia's actions were the result of a mental health crisis, not premeditated murder. Olivia herself took the stand, her testimony an unsettling mixture of remorse and rationalization. She spoke of her deep love for Ethan and her fear of abandonment, claiming that she never meant to hurt him. Her apparent lack of full comprehension of the gravity of her actions left many in the courtroom disturbed. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a scathing indictment of Olivia's actions before sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashland slowly healed, the community was left to reflect on the nature of love, trust, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. The case would be remembered not just for its shocking conclusion, but as a catalyst for change and a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing toxic relationship dynamics before they escalate to tragedy. In the quiet streets of Oak Ridge Heights, a picturesque suburban enclave, the Blackwood residence stood as a beacon of domestic bliss. To the casual observer, Zephr and Lorelei Blackwood epitomized the American dream: successful careers, a beautifully maintained craftsman home, and a marriage that seemed to grow stronger with each passing year. Their neighbors often remarked on the couple's apparent devotion to one another, evidenced by their frequent dinner parties and synchronized jogging routines. But beneath the polished veneer of their seemingly perfect life, the Blackwoods harbored a secret that would ultimately lead to their undoing. For the past 2 years, Zephr and Lorelei had been active participants in a local swinging community, a lifestyle choice that promised to add excitement and passion to their decade-long marriage. At first, their foray into the world of consensual non-monogamy seemed to reinvigorate their relationship. They spoke of feeling closer, more honest, and more in love than ever before.
However, as with many things that glitter, the reality of their chosen path was far more complex and fraught with danger than either could have anticipated. What began as a mutual adventure in sexual exploration would eventually expose deep-seated insecurities and long-buried resentments. This is the story of how a couple's search for excitement and fulfillment led to jealousy, rage, and murder. Zephr Blackwood was a rising star in the tech scene. With his sharp intellect and innovative ideas, he had quickly climbed the corporate ladder at a leading software company. Colleagues described him as driven, charismatic, and occasionally intense. Standing tall in a runner's physique, Zephr turned heads wherever he went. Despite his professional success, those closest to him noted a persistent undercurrent of insecurity, stemming from a childhood marked by his parents' messy divorce and his father's subsequent absence. Lorelei Blackwood was Zephyr's perfect complement. A talented freelance graphic designer, she balanced her husband's type A personality with her more laid-back, creative approach to life. With her warm eyes, infectious laugh, and curves that defied her dedication to yoga, Lorelei was the kind of person who made friends easily and kept them for life. Growing up in a large, boisterous family, she valued connection and openness above all else. The couple met during their senior year at the university. Zephr was immediately drawn to Lorelei's free spirit and artistic talent, while she found herself captivated by his ambition and hidden vulnerability. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a beachside proposal just 6 months after graduation, and they married a year later in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. For the first 7 years of their marriage, Zephr and Lorelei seemed to have it all. They traveled extensively, built successful careers, and created a home that was the envy of their friends. However, as they approached their mid-30s, a sense of restlessness began to creep into their relationship. The passion that had once burned so brightly had dimmed to a comfortable but uninspiring glow. It was Lorelei who first broached the subject of exploring new avenues in their sex life. Always the more sexually adventurous of the two, she suggested they attend a few workshops on tantric practices and BDSM. Zephr, eager to please his wife and reignite their spark, agreed enthusiastically. These workshops opened up new channels of communication between the couple, and they found themselves discussing fantasies and desires they had never before shared. It was during one of these conversations that the topic of swinging first arose. Lorelei had read about it online and was intrigued by the idea of consensual non-monogamy. Zephr, initially hesitant, warmed to the concept as Lorelei painted a picture of increased intimacy and shared adventures. After months of discussion, research, and soul-searching, the Blackwoods decided to take the plunge. They created profiles on swinger websites, attended a few meet-and-greet events, and finally participated in their first full swap with another couple. The experience was exhilarating, and for a time it seemed to breathe new life into their marriage. Little did they know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. The Blackwoods' entry into the world of swinging was marked by a mix of nervous excitement and cautious optimism. Their first experience, a soft swap with a couple they met through a reputable swinger website, exceeded their expectations. The evening was filled with laughter, flirtation, and a level of sexual tension that neither Zephr nor Lorelei had experienced in years. As they drove home, hands intertwined, they couldn't stop grinning at each other, already planning their next encounter. Over the next few months, Zephr and Lorelei became regulars in the swinging scene. They attended parties at upscale clubs, participated in intimate gatherings at private homes, and even organized a few events of their own. Their social circle expanded rapidly, filled with like-minded couples who shared their desire for excitement and sexual exploration. Lorelei, in particular, thrived in this new environment. Her natural charisma and open-mindedness made her a favorite among their swinging friends. She reveled in the attention she received from both men and women, and her confidence soared. Zephr, too, seemed to flourish initially. He enjoyed the ego boost that came from other women finding him attractive, and he took pride in having a wife that others desired. The couple's sex life, both with others and between themselves, reached new heights of passion and intensity. They found themselves experimenting with fantasies and kinks they had never before considered. Lorelei would often joke that they were having more sex now than they did in their first year of marriage. As they became more comfortable with the lifestyle, the Blackwoods began to form deeper connections with some of the couples they met. They particularly clicked with Ethan and Nova Sterling, a pair of free-spirited artists
who had been in the swinging scene for years. The four of them often got together for dinner and drinks, which would invariably lead to steamy encounters that left everyone satisfied. However, as the months wore on, subtle changes began to occur in the dynamics of Zephr and Lorelai's relationship. While Lorelai continued to embrace the lifestyle with enthusiasm, Zephr started to show signs of discomfort. He began to notice the way other men looked at his wife, the ease with which she flirted and connected with their swinging partners. What had once been a source of pride now stirred uncomfortable feelings in the pit of his stomach. Zephr found himself paying closer attention to Lorelai's interactions, especially with Ethan Sterling. He couldn't help but notice the lingering touches, the inside jokes, the way Lorelai's eyes seemed to light up in Ethan's presence. Rational thought told him that this was all part of the game, that Lorelai always came home with him at the end of the night. But a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered doubts and fueled his growing insecurity. Despite his misgivings, Zephr kept his feelings to himself. He didn't want to disappoint Lorelai or appear weak in front of their new friends. Instead, he threw himself into the lifestyle with renewed vigor, as if trying to prove something to himself and others. He initiated more encounters, suggested wilder scenarios, and pushed his boundaries further than he was truly comfortable with. Lorelai, caught up in the excitement and new experiences, failed to notice the subtle changes in her husband's behavior. She interpreted his increased enthusiasm as a sign that he was enjoying the lifestyle as much as she was. In her mind, swinging had brought them closer together, opening up new avenues of communication and shared experiences. As their second anniversary in the lifestyle approached, the Blackwoods were seen as a success story in their swinging circle. They were attractive, fun, and seemingly more in love than ever. But beneath the surface, the seeds of discord had been sown. The very lifestyle that had reinvigorated their marriage was now silently driving a wedge between them, setting the stage for the tragic events that were to come. The first signs of trouble in the Blackwoods' seemingly perfect arrangement appeared subtly at first. Zephr began to make offhand comments about cutting back on their swinging activities, suggesting they focus more on their own relationship. Lorelai, interpreting this as a passing mood, gently brushed off his concerns and encouraged him to embrace the freedom and excitement they had discovered. As weeks passed, Zephyr's jealousy grew more pronounced. He started to question Lorelai about her interactions with other men, particularly Ethan Sterling. His inquiries, initially casual, became more frequent and intense, where once he had enjoyed watching Lorelai with other partners, he now found himself averting his eyes, a knot forming in his stomach. Lorelai, for her part, struggled to understand the change in her husband. She repeatedly assured him of her love and commitment, emphasizing that their adventures in swinging were purely physical and did not threaten their emotional bond. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears as Zephyr's insecurities deepened. The tension between them began to spill over into their daily lives. Arguments that started about swinging quickly devolved into broader accusations and recriminations. Zephr would bring up past grievances, questioning Lorelai's fidelity even before they entered the lifestyle. Lorelai, frustrated by what she saw as Zephyr's irrational behavior, found herself becoming defensive and withdrawn. Their professional lives started to suffer as well. Zephr, usually laser-focused at work, became distracted and irritable. His colleagues noticed the change, whispering about possible troubles at home. Lorelai, whose work required creativity and a positive outlook, found it increasingly difficult to meet deadlines and satisfy clients. Despite the growing discord, Lorelai was reluctant to give up the lifestyle that had brought her so much joy and self-discovery. She suggested they take a break from group activities and focus on one-on-one encounters, hoping this would ease Zephyr's jealousy. But even this compromise led to conflict, with Zephr accusing Lorelai of trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. As their arguments intensified, the Blackwoods' facade of domestic bliss began to crumble. In a last-ditch effort to salvage their marriage, Zephr suggested they seek counseling. Lorelai agreed, hoping that a professional could help them navigate the complex emotions stirred up by their foray into non-monogamy. However, finding a therapist who was both qualified and non-judgmental about their lifestyle proved challenging, further adding to their frustration. As the date of an upcoming swinger party hosted by the Sterlings approached, the tension in the Blackwood household reached a fever pitch. Lorelai was determined to attend, seeing it as an opportunity to reconnect with friends and reaffirm their place in the community. Zephr,
conflicted and resentful, reluctantly agreed to go, setting the stage for the tragic events that would unfold. The evening of May 15th dawned warm and clear, a perfect spring day. As twilight approached, the Blackwoods began preparing for the Sterlings' party, with an undercurrent of tension thrumming between them. Lorelai hummed to herself as she applied her makeup, choosing a slinky black dress that accentuated her curves. Zephr, watching her from the doorway, felt a familiar mix of desire and dread coiling in his stomach. They arrived at the Sterlings' upscale loft just as the party was getting started. The spacious apartment was bathed in soft, colorful lights, with sensual music pulsing through hidden speakers. Couples and singles mingled, drinks in hand, the air thick with anticipation and pheromones. Nova Sterling, resplendent in a shimmering gold jumpsuit, greeted them warmly. Zephr couldn't help but notice how her embrace with Lorelai lingered, the two women exchanging knowing smiles. Ether appeared moments later, clapping Zephr on the back before placing a gentle kiss on Lorelai's cheek. The knot in Zephyr's stomach tightened. As the night progressed, Zephr found himself growing increasingly agitated. He watched as Lorelai flitted from group to group, her laughter carrying across the room. She seemed to be in her element, radiating confidence and sensuality. In contrast, Zephr felt awkward and out of place, nursing the same drink for hours as he observed the interactions around him. The party began to shift gears as couples started to pair off or form small groups, disappearing into the various playrooms the Sterlings had set up. Zephr lost sight of Lorelai for a while, his anxiety spiking as he searched the crowded loft. He finally spotted her in deep conversation with Ether, their heads close together as they spoke in low tones. Unable to contain himself any longer, Zephr approached the pair. He caught the tail end of their conversation, something about meeting up later in the week for coffee. Lorelai's eyes widened slightly as she noticed Zephr, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she composed herself. Zephr, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, suggested it was time to leave. Lorelai protested, arguing that the night hasn't ended. Their disagreement, though conducted in hushed tones, drew curious glances from nearby guests. Ether, sensing the tension, tried to smooth things over, but his intervention only seemed to irritate Zephr further. As the argument threatened to escalate, Nova appeared, smoothly inserting herself into the situation. With practiced ease, she guided Zephr and Lorelai to a quiet corner of the loft, encouraging them to take a moment to cool off. She offered them water and gentle words of advice, reminding them of the community's emphasis on open communication and mutual respect. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Nova's intervention had diffused the situation. Zephr took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm himself. Lorelai reached out, squeezing his hand in a conciliatory gesture. But as they stood to rejoin the party, Zephr caught sight of Ether watching them intently. Something in the other man's gaze, concern, pity, or perhaps something else entirely, caused Zephyr's tenuous control to snap. In a cold, clipped voice, he announced that he and Lorelai were leaving. This time, Lorelai didn't argue. She could see the storm brewing behind Zephyr's eyes and knew that staying would only lead to a scene. Apologizing profusely to Nova and avoiding Ether's gaze, Lorelai allowed Zephr to lead her out of the loft. The drive home was fraught with silence, the tension between them so thick it was almost suffocating. Lorelai stared out the window, her earlier vivacity replaced by a wary exhaustion. Zephr gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his jaw clenched as he navigated the nearly empty streets. As they pulled into their driveway, neither made a move to exit the car immediately. For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on them. Finally, Lorelai turned to Zephr, her voice soft but firm as she said, "We need to talk about this. We can't go on like this." Zephr nodded stiffly, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Without a word, he got out of the car and headed for the front door. Lorelai followed, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the conversation to come would likely change their lives forever. Neither of them could have predicted just how prophetic that feeling would prove to be. As soon as the front door closed behind them, the facade of calm they had maintained in public crumbled. Zephr rounded on Lorelai, his face contorted with a mix of anger and pain. The words tumbled out of him in a torrent of accusations and grievances, all the doubts and fears he had been harboring for months, finally finding voice. He raged about her behavior at the party, the way she had flirted openly with Ether and others. He brought up past encounters, dissecting them with jealous scrutiny, finding evidence of betrayal in the smallest gestures and glances. His voice rose as he spoke of the coffee plans he had overheard, convinced it was proof of an ongoing affair. Lorelei, initially stunned by the ferocity of Zephyr's outburst, found her own anger rising to meet his. She defended herself vehemently, reminding him that openness and honesty had always been the foundation of their relationship and their foray into swinging. She accused him of hypocrisy, pointing out his own enthusiastic participation in their lifestyle choice until recently. Their argument echoed through the house, a cacophony of hurt feelings and misunderstandings. Lorelei tried to reason with Zephr, to make him see that his jealousy was unfounded, but her words seemed to bounce off him without making an impact. In frustration, she brought up his own dalliances within the swinging community, asking why it was acceptable for him, but not for her. This only served to enrage Zephr further. He advanced on Lorelei, his tall frame looming over her as he backed her into a corner of their living room. Lorelei, feeling trapped and increasingly frightened by Zephyr's uncharacteristic aggression, attempted to push past him. In that moment, something in Zephr snapped. As Lorelei tried to move away, he grabbed her arms, his fingers digging into her skin with bruising force. Lorelei cried out in pain and surprise, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at the man she had loved for over a decade, suddenly unrecognizable in his fury. She struggled against his grip, her own anger giving way to fear as she realized how out of control the situation had become. Zephr, lost in a haze of jealousy and rage, didn't seem to hear her pleas to let go. In her desperation to break free, Lorelei's hand caught Zephr across the face, her nails leaving angry red scratches on his cheek. The physical contact seemed to push Zephr over the edge. With a roar of inarticulate rage, he shoved Lorelei hard. She stumbled backwards, her heel catching on the edge of the area rug. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her arms flailing as she tried to catch herself. But there was nothing to break her fall, and her head struck the corner of the solid oak coffee table with a sickening thud. The sound seemed to snap Zephr out of his frenzy. He stood frozen, watching in horror as Lorelei crumpled to the floor, a small pool of blood beginning to form beneath her head. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Zephyr's ragged breathing. For several long moments, he remained rooted to the spot, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then, as if moving through molasses, he stumbled towards Lorelei's motionless form. He fell to his knees beside her, hands shaking as he reached out to touch her. Her skin was still warm, but as he frantically searched for a pulse, he found nothing. The reality of the situation crashed over Zephr like a tidal wave. He had done the unthinkable. In a moment of uncontrolled anger, he had taken the life of the woman he loved. As the enormity of his actions began to sink in, Zephr let out a howl of anguish, cradling Lorelei's lifeless body in his arms as tears streamed down his face. In the quiet suburban street outside, a neighbor who had been walking his dog paused, startled by the sound of despair emanating from the Blackwood residence. It was a cry that would haunt the neighborhood for years to come, marking the moment when a loving marriage ended in unimaginable tragedy. The early morning calm of Oak Ridge Heights was shattered by the arrival of police cruisers and an ambulance, their lights painting the tree-lined street in alternating flashes of red and blue. Neighbors emerged from their homes as they watched the unfolding scene, with a mix of curiosity and dread. Detective Rhiannon Frost, a veteran of Homicide Division, arrived on the scene shortly after the first responders. As she ducked under the crime scene tape, she was struck by the contrast between the manicured exterior of the Blackwood home and the chaos that awaited inside. The living room, once a showcase of tasteful decor, now bore the unmistakable signs of violence. The coffee table was askew. A lamp lay shattered on the floor, and at the center of it all was the body of Lorelei Blackwood, partially covered by a sheet. Forensic technicians moved around the room with practiced efficiency, photographing and collecting evidence. Frost's keen eyes took in every detail. Dr. Kai Nakamura briefed her on their initial findings. The cause of death appeared to be blunt force trauma to the head, likely from impact with the corner of the coffee table. Signs of a struggle were evident, including bruising on the victim's arms and defensive wounds on her hands. As Nakamura spoke, Frost's attention was drawn to the figure of Zephr Blackwood, seated on a dining room chair, his head in his hands. He was still wearing the clothes from the previous night's party, now rumpled and stained. A uniformed officer stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the distraught husband. Frost approached Zephr, her experienced gaze noting his scratched cheek
and the smears of blood on his shirt. In a voice hoarse from crying, he began to speak, weaving a tale of a party, an argument, and a tragic accident. As she listened, Frost's instincts told her there was more to the story than Zephr was revealing. His account seemed rehearsed, lacking the raw emotion one would expect from a man who had just lost his wife. She made a mental note to dig deeper into the couple's background and recent activities. Outside, the neighbors huddled in small groups, exchanging shocked whispers and speculative glances. The Blackwoods had always seemed so happy, so perfect. What could have gone so terribly wrong? In the days following Lorelai Blackwood's death, Detective Frost and her team worked tirelessly to piece together the events that led to that fateful night. Their investigation began to reveal a complex web of relationships and hidden tensions that lay beneath the surface of the Blackwoods' seemingly idyllic life. Interviews with friends and colleagues painted a picture of a couple who had recently embraced the swinging lifestyle. While many expressed surprise at this revelation, a select few provided valuable insights into the dynamics of the Blackwoods' open marriage. Nova Sterling, in particular, proved to be a crucial witness, recounting the argument she had witnessed at the party and the obvious tension between Zephr and Lorelai. As the detectives delved deeper, they uncovered a trail of digital evidence that shed light on the couple's private life. Text messages and emails revealed Zephyr's growing jealousy and Lorelai's increasing frustration with his behavior. Particularly damning was a series of messages between Lorelai and Ethan Sterling, discussing Zephyr's recent mood swings and Lorelai's concerns about the future of her marriage. Forensic analysis of the crime scene yielded more damning evidence against Zephr. The angle and force of Lorelai's fatal injury were inconsistent with a simple fall. DNA evidence under Lorelai's fingernails matched Zephyr's, corroborating the signs of a struggle. Furthermore, toxicology reports showed that while Lorelai had a modest amount of alcohol in her system, Zephyr's blood alcohol level had been significantly higher, suggesting he may have been more impaired than he initially claimed. As the investigation progressed, Detective Frost brought Zephr in for a series of intense interrogations. Under the relentless pressure of questioning, his carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. Inconsistencies in his story emerged, and his demeanor shifted from grief-stricken widow to a man consumed by guilt and fear. In a dramatic turn of events, Ethan Sterling came forward with additional information. He revealed that Lorelai had confided in him about her plans to leave Zephr, citing his increasingly controlling and jealous behavior. This revelation provided a possible motive for Zephyr's actions, suggesting that the murder may have been premeditated rather than a heat-of-the-moment crime of passion. The investigation also uncovered financial records indicating that Zephr had recently inquired about the couple's life insurance policies, adding another layer of suspicion to his actions. Friends reported that he had been under increasing stress at work, with rumors of potential layoffs circulating in his company. As the evidence mounted, the prosecution began to build a strong case against Zephr Blackwood. The narrative that emerged was one of a man who, faced with the prospect of losing both his wife and his carefully cultivated image of success, had lashed out in a jealous rage with tragic consequences. The stage was set for a trial that would captivate the city and beyond, promising to expose the hidden world of suburban swingers and the devastating consequences of jealousy unleashed. Prosecutor Vivian Zhao opened the proceedings with a powerful statement, painting a vivid picture of a marriage destroyed by jealousy and a woman's life cut tragically short. She promised to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Zephr Blackwood had murdered his wife in a fit of rage, driven by his inability to control her and his fear of losing her. The defense countered with a narrative of a tragic accident, the result of a loving marriage strained by lifestyle choices that neither party was fully prepared for. Holloway sought to portray Zephr as a devoted husband, overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Nova and Ethan Sterling provided crucial testimony about the Blackwoods' involvement in the swinging community and the visible tension between them on the night of Lorelai's death. Their accounts were both illuminating and scandalous, causing a stir in the courtroom and generating salacious headlines. Forensic experts presented detailed analyses of the crime scene, with Dr. Kai Nakamura delivering damning testimony about the nature of Lorelai's injuries. His assertion that the fatal wound was inconsistent with an accidental fall dealt a significant blow to the defense's case. Perhaps the most dramatic moment of the trial came when Zephr Blackwood himself took the stand.
Under Holloway's careful guidance, he presented himself as a man deeply in love with his wife, who had agreed to explore swinging to please her. He spoke of his growing discomfort with the lifestyle and his fears that he was losing Lorelei to it. However, under Zhao's relentless cross-examination, Zephyr's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. She confronted him with text messages, emails, and witness statements that contradicted his version of events. As the questioning intensified, Zephyr's composure slipped, revealing flashes of the anger and jealousy that had led to that fatal night. The gallery watched in rapt attention as Zephr struggled to maintain his story under the prosecution's onslaught. His voice cracked as he recounted the final argument with Lorelei, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might break down and confess. But he managed to hold himself together, sticking to his claim of a tragic accident to the end. As the trial neared its conclusion, both the prosecution and defense delivered impassioned closing arguments. So urged the jury to see through Zephyr's lies and hold him accountable for the brutal act that had ended Lorelei's life. Holloway, in turn, pleaded for understanding, asking the jury to consider the complex emotions and circumstances that had led to this tragedy. With the evidence presented and arguments made, the case was turned over to the jury. As they filed out to begin deliberations, a tense hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Zephr Blackwood now rested in their hands. In the end, the jury took less than 6 hours to reach a verdict. Zephr Blackwood was found guilty of second-degree murder, a decision that sent shockwaves through the community and brought a measure of closure to Lorelei's grieving family and friends. The judge, citing the brutal nature of the crime and Zephyr's lack of remorse, sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison. The aftermath of the trial left an indelible mark on the community. The case had exposed the hidden world of suburban swingers, leading to heated debates about morality, trust, and the nature of modern relationships. Some couples who had been part of the lifestyle quietly distanced themselves, while others became vocal advocates for ethical non-monogamy, emphasizing the importance of communication and consent. In the end, the tragic story of Zephr and Lorelei Blackwood served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the strongest relationships can be undone by jealousy, mistrust, and uncontrolled anger. Their story would be remembered not just as a sensational crime, but as a complex human tragedy, born from the eternal struggle between love, desire, and the need for control. Emmett Dalton grew up the youngest of 3 siblings. His family owned a small hardware store, which had been in the Dalton family for generations. Emmett was always known as the gentle soul of the family, with a kind word for everyone and a willingness to help anyone in need. He had a close relationship with his parents, who cherished his thoughtful and considerate nature. In school, Emmett was not the most popular kid, but he was well-liked for his easygoing attitude and warm smile. He had a small circle of friends who appreciated his loyalty and sense of humor. After graduating high school, Emmett decided to stay in their home to help his parents run the hardware store. He enjoyed the simple life and found contentment in the routine of small-town living. Emmett's relationship with his family was solid. His older siblings had moved to nearby cities but frequently visited, maintaining a strong bond with their youngest brother. Emmett was particularly close to his sister Rachel, who often confided in him and sought his advice. His parents, though traditional in their ways, were supportive of Emmett and proud of the man he had become. Emmett had a few relationships, none of which were particularly serious. He was looking for someone who shared his values and appreciated the quiet life he enjoyed. Lila Renshaw was a strikingly beautiful woman with an air of mystery that captivated those around her. She grew up in the bustling city of Larkspur, a stark contrast to the quiet town. Lila's upbringing was far from idyllic. Her parents had a hard relationship, marked by frequent arguments and bouts of separation. As an only child, Lila often found herself caught in the middle of their conflicts, learning early on how to manipulate situations to her advantage. In her teenage years, Lila developed a reputation for being headstrong and manipulative. She had a string of relationships, each ending in turmoil due to her controlling nature. Lila thrived on power and control, often pushing her partners to the brink with her demanding and possessive behavior. Despite this, Her charm and allure made it difficult for people to see her true nature until it was too late. After finishing high school, Lila moved to town in search of a fresh start. She quickly found a job at a local boutique, where her charisma and sales skills made her a favorite among customers. It was here that she met Emmett Dalton, a regular customer who was immediately taken by her beauty and confidence. To Lila, Emmett seemed like the perfect target, a kind, gentle man who was easy to control. Lila's past relationships had always followed a similar pattern. She would charm her way into her partner's life, gradually isolating them from their friends and family. Once she had established control, her true colors would show, leading to intense arguments and emotional manipulation. Her partners often felt trapped, unable to leave due to Lila's relentless grip on their lives. When Lila met Emmett, she saw him as another challenge, someone she could mold and control. She was drawn to his kindness and vulnerability, seeing them as weaknesses she could exploit. Emmett's trusting nature made it easy for Lila to weave her way into his life, slowly isolating him from those who cared about him. To the outside world, Lila and Emmett appeared to be a happy couple, but behind closed doors a much darker story was unfolding. Emmett first met Lila on a warm summer afternoon at the local boutique. He was shopping for a birthday gift for his mother, when Lila, with her striking looks and confident demeanor, offered to help him. Their interaction was brief, but left a lasting impression on Emmett. He couldn't stop thinking about her radiant smile and the way she seemed genuinely interested in helping him. A few days later, Emmett returned to the boutique, this time with the intention of asking Lila out. To his delight, she accepted, and they arranged to meet for coffee at a quaint cafe in town. Their first date was filled with laughter and easy conversation. Lila was charming and attentive, asking Emmett about his life, his family, and his dreams. Emmett felt an immediate connection, believing he had finally found someone who truly understood him. As their relationship progressed, Emmett's friends and family noticed how happy he seemed. Lila often joined him at family gatherings and social events, quickly becoming a familiar face in the community. She seemed to fit right in, and Emmett's parents were pleased to see their son so content. However, there were subtle changes in Emmett that only those closest to him noticed. Lila's charm had a way of overshadowing her more manipulative tendencies. She began to subtly influence Emmett's decisions, steering him away from activities and people she deemed unnecessary. At first, it was small things, like suggesting they spend more time alone together or questioning the motives of his friends. Emmett, eager to please Lila and maintain the harmony of their relationship, often acquiesced to her demands. Lila was meticulous in her approach. She never directly forbade Emmett from seeing his friends or family, but she planted seeds of doubt in his mind. She would mention how certain friends didn't seem to appreciate him, or how his family was overly critical. Emmett, who had always been sensitive to others' opinions, began to internalize these suggestions, gradually distancing himself from his loved ones. Despite these changes, Emmett remained convinced that Lila was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He admired her confidence and believed that she had his best interests at heart. Lila, on the other hand, was pleased with how easily she had managed to isolate Emmett. She felt a sense of power knowing that she was the center of his world, controlling his actions and decisions. Their relationship continued to deepen, with Emmett becoming more dependent on Lila for emotional support and validation. Lila, aware of her influence, began to tighten her grip, ensuring that Emmett had little to no contact with anyone outside their relationship. To the outside world, they appeared to be a perfect couple, but behind closed doors, the dynamics were far more sinister. Emmett's once vibrant social life dwindled to nothing, leaving him isolated and completely under Lila's control. As the months passed, Lila's control over Emmett grew stronger. She employed subtle yet effective methods to isolate him from his family and friends, ensuring that he remained entirely dependent on her. It started with casual suggestions and offhand comments, but gradually, her tactics became more manipulative and deliberate. One evening, as Emmett prepared to meet his sister Rachel for dinner, Lila expressed concern about his family's influence on him. She mentioned how they always seemed to criticize their relationship and hinted that perhaps they didn't truly want him to be happy. Emmett, already sensitive to his family's opinions, began to doubt their intentions. He canceled the dinner, opting instead to stay home with Lila. Lila also made it a point to be present whenever Emmett received phone calls from friends or family. She would sit close by, making him uncomfortable and self-conscious about the conversation. Over time, Emmett's calls to his loved ones became less frequent as he grew tired of the tension it caused. His friends noticed his absence from social gatherings and reached out, but Lila always found a way to intercept their messages or make excuses for why Emmett couldn't attend. Lila's control extended to Emmett's daily routines and activities. She insisted on accompanying him everywhere, from grocery shopping to his volunteer work at the local community center. Emmett, eager to keep the peace, didn't resist. He began to feel suffocated, but he couldn't pinpoint the source of his discomfort. Lila's constant presence and influence made it difficult for him to think clearly or make decisions independently. One particularly telling incident occurred when Emmett's childhood friend, Leo, invited him on a weekend fishing trip. Emmett, excited about the prospect of reconnecting with Leo, shared the news with Lila. Her reaction was swift and intense. She questioned Leo's motives, suggesting that he was trying to pull Emmett away from their relationship. Lila accused Emmett of being inconsiderate, claiming that he was abandoning her for a frivolous outing. Emmett, caught off guard by her emotional outburst, reluctantly declined Leo's invitation. Lila's manipulation didn't stop there. She began to control Emmett's finances, convincing him to merge their bank accounts for convenience. This move further isolated Emmett, as he now had limited access to his own money. Lila monitored his spending closely, questioning every purchase and often overriding his decisions. Emmett felt increasingly powerless, unable to assert himself without facing Lila's wrath. Despite these red flags, Emmett continued to believe that Lila had his best interests at heart. He rationalized her behavior as a sign of her deep love and commitment to their relationship. However, the isolation took a toll on his mental and emotional well-being. He became withdrawn and anxious, struggling to reconcile his love for Lila with the growing sense of entrapment. Lila, sensing Emmett's inner turmoil, doubled down on her efforts to isolate him. She discouraged him from seeking help or confiding in others, framing it as a betrayal of their trust. Emmett, already emotionally fragile, complied. He cut off contact with the few remaining friends and family members he had left, fully entrusting his life to Lila's control. As the months turned into a year, Emmett's world became smaller and more confined. His once vibrant and fulfilling life was reduced to the narrow confines of his relationship with Lila. The community, unaware of the turmoil behind closed doors, continued to see them as a happy couple. Despite Lila's control, there were moments when he longed for the comfort and support of his family and friends. These flickers of desire for connection were met with resistance from Lila, who sensed that she was losing her grip on him. One afternoon, Emmett found himself standing outside the hardware store, reminiscing about the days when he would work alongside his father. He missed the camaraderie of the small community and the simple joys of his previous life. On an impulse, he decided to visit his parents, hoping for a moment of normalcy and perhaps a chance to explain his absence. When Emmett arrived at his parents' house, they were overjoyed to see him. His mother, Eleanor, embraced him tightly, her eyes filled with concern. His father, Thomas, greeted him with a firm handshake, his expression a mix of relief and worry. Emmett felt a surge of emotion as he sat down with his parents, who eagerly caught him up on family news and events. For a brief moment, Emmett felt like himself again, surrounded by the warmth and familiarity of his family. However, as the visit progressed, he could sense Lila's disapproval hanging over him like a dark cloud. She had called him multiple times during the visit, each call more insistent than the last. Emmett's parents noticed his unease and gently probed, asking if everything was all right. Emmett hesitated, but eventually confided in his parents about the strain he was feeling. He didn't go into detail about Lila's manipulative behavior, but he mentioned feeling overwhelmed and isolated. Eleanor and Thomas listened attentively, offering their support and urging Emmett to reach out more often. They assured him that he was always welcome and that they would help him in any way they could. Leaving his parents' house that day, Emmett felt a glimmer of hope. He resolved to reconnect with his family and friends, believing that their support would help him regain a sense of normalcy. However, when he returned home, Lila was waiting for him, her eyes cold and calculating. Lila's anger was palpable. She accused Emmett of betraying her trust and undermining their relationship. She framed his visit to his parents as a deliberate attempt to distance himself from her. Emmett, caught off guard by her intensity, tried to explain that he simply missed his family and needed their support. But Lila wouldn't hear of it. She berated him,
using emotional manipulation to make him feel guilty and ashamed. The following days were a nightmare for Emmett. Lila's controlling behavior escalated, and she became more possessive and paranoid. She monitored his every move, checking his phone and questioning his whereabouts. Emmett felt trapped, unable to breathe under the suffocating weight of her control. Despite Lila's efforts, Emmett managed to reach out to his sister Rachel through discreet messages. Rachel, sensing her brother's distress, agreed to meet him in secret. They met at a secluded park, where Emmett poured out his heart, revealing the extent of Lila's manipulation and control. Rachel was horrified and immediately offered her support, vowing to help Emmett break free from Lila's grasp. Emmett's attempts to reconnect with his loved ones were fraught with challenges. Lila's influence was pervasive, and she used every tool at her disposal to maintain her control over him. However, the seeds of doubt had been planted in Emmett's mind. He began to see through Lila's facade, recognizing her manipulative tactics for what they were. The more he tried to reconnect with his family and friends, the more determined he became to regain his independence and escape from Lila's clutches. The tension between Emmett and Lila reached a boiling point one fateful evening. Emmett had been secretly meeting with his sister Rachel, seeking her support and advice on how to extricate himself from Lila's control. Rachel, deeply concerned for her brother's well-being, urged him to leave Lila and return to his family. Emmett, emboldened by his sister's encouragement, decided it was time to confront Lila and end their toxic relationship. Emmett chose a quiet Sunday afternoon to break the news to Lila. He hoped that the calmness of the day would help keep the situation from escalating. As they sat in their living room, Emmett took a deep breath and told Lila that he needed some space and time apart. He explained that he felt suffocated and isolated, and that he needed to reconnect with his family and friends to find himself again. Lila's reaction was immediate and explosive. She accused Emmett of being ungrateful and selfish, of abandoning the relationship they had built together. Her voice rose in anger, and she began to hurl insults and accusations, attempting to undermine Emmett's resolve. She claimed that his family and friends didn't truly care about him, that they only wanted to control him and pull him away from her. Emmett tried to remain calm, but Lila's relentless tirade wore him down. He felt a mix of anger, guilt, and sadness as he listened to her venomous words. Despite her emotional manipulation, Emmett knew that he couldn't continue living under her control. He stood his ground, repeating his need for space and asserting that he was making the decision for his own well-being. Lila, realizing that her usual tactics were not working, shifted her approach. She broke down in tears, pleading with Emmett to reconsider. She promised to change, to give him more freedom, and to be more understanding. Emmett, seeing through her manipulative behavior, remained firm in his decision. He told her that he needed to leave, and that it was the best thing for both of them. The atmosphere in the room grew tense and charged with emotion. Lila's tears quickly turned to anger again, and she lashed out, accusing Emmett of cheating and betrayal. Emmett, exhausted and emotionally drained, decided to leave the house for a while to clear his head. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door, leaving Lila seething with rage. When Emmett finally returned home, he found Lila waiting for him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She approached him with a calm demeanor, apologizing for her outburst and begging for another chance. Emmett, though sympathetic to her pain, stood his ground and reiterated his need for space. That night, as Emmett tried to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Lila's behavior had become increasingly erratic, and he feared that her desperation might drive her to do something drastic. His instincts were correct. In the early hours of the morning, Emmett was awakened by a noise in the living room. He got up to investigate and found Lila sitting on the couch, clutching a large kitchen knife. Her eyes were wild with desperation and anger. Emmett's heart raced as he tried to talk her down, but Lila's mind was made up. She accused Emmett of ruining her life, of turning everyone against her. In a fit of rage, she lunged at him with the knife. Emmett managed to dodge her initial attack, but Lila was relentless. A struggle ensued, with Emmett trying to disarm Lila while avoiding her frantic swings. In the chaos, Lila's grip on the knife slipped, and Emmett seized the opportunity to wrest it from her hand. In the aftermath of the struggle, both were left breathless and shaken. Emmett, now holding the knife, dropped it and stepped back, giving Lila space to calm down. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Emmett knew he had to leave. He quickly packed a bag and without looking back walked out of the house, leaving Lila behind. He drove to his parents' home, where he was welcomed with open arms, as he told them everything that just happened. Emmett knew that the road to recovery would be long and difficult, but he was ready to take the first step. Lila, consumed by a mix of rage and despair, couldn't accept the loss of control over Emmett. Her mind raced with thoughts of revenge and retribution. She felt humiliated and abandoned, and her desperation turned into a dangerous resolve. In the days following Emmett's departure, Lila's behavior became increasingly insane. She spent hours pacing the house, plotting ways to regain control over Emmett. Her anger festered, and she began to see his decision to leave as an unforgivable betrayal. Lila convinced herself that Emmett's family and friends were to blame for his decision, and she resolved to make him pay for abandoning her. One evening, as Emmett was visiting his parents, Lila devised a plan. She knew that Emmett often took a walk through a secluded part of town in the evenings to clear his head. She decided to confront him there, away from prying eyes. Armed with the same kitchen knife from their previous altercation, Lila set out to intercept Emmett. As Emmett approached a secluded park, he was startled to see Lila standing there, her eyes fixed on him. He stopped in his tracks, a mix of fear and sadness washing over him. Lila's appearance was disheveled, and her eyes burned with a dangerous intensity. Emmett knew that this confrontation could not end well. Lila's voice was cold and menacing, as she accused Emmett of ruining her life. She blamed him for her misery and demanded that he return to her. Emmett tried to reason with her, explaining that their relationship was toxic and that he needed to move on for his own well-being. But Lila was beyond reason. In a sudden violent outburst, Lila lunged at Emmett with the knife. Emmett tried to defend himself, but Lila's rage gave her a frightening strength. A struggle ensued, with Emmett desperately trying to disarm her. In the chaos, Lila managed to stab Emmett, the blade piercing his side. Emmett cried out in pain, but Lila showed no signs of stopping. As Emmett fell to the ground clutching his wound, Lila stood over him, her face contorted with fury and madness. Emmett, weakened and bleeding, pleaded with her to stop, but his words fell on deaf ears. Lila, consumed by her desire for control and revenge, delivered a final fatal blow. The once peaceful park was now a crime scene, with Emmett lying lifeless on the ground. Lila, covered in his blood, stood there for a moment, her mind slowly registering the reality of what she had done. Realizing that she couldn't stay there, Lila fled the scene, leaving Emmett's body behind. She drove aimlessly through the night, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. She knew that it was only a matter of time before the police would come looking for her. The next morning, Emmett's body was discovered by a passerby who immediately called the police. The murder of Emmett Dalton sent shockwaves through the community, a town unaccustomed to such violence. The local police, led by Detective Samuel Carter, launched a thorough investigation to uncover the truth behind Emmett's tragic death. As the news spread, the tight-knit community rallied around Emmett's family, offering support and demanding justice. Detective Carter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, began his work by examining the crime scene. The secluded park where Emmett's body was found offered little in the way of witnesses, but the brutality of the attack indicated a crime of passion. The wounds on Emmett's body suggested a frenzied assault, pointing to someone who knew him well. The investigation quickly focused on Lila Renshaw, Emmett's estranged girlfriend. Neighbors and acquaintances described their tumultuous relationship, with several recounting instances of Lila's controlling behavior. Emmett's family provided crucial insights into the couple's recent conflicts and Emmett's attempts to distance himself from Lila. These testimonies painted a picture of a relationship marked by manipulation, culminating in a fatal confrontation. Detective Carter and his team conducted a thorough search of Lila's home, uncovering several pieces of incriminating evidence. They found Emmett's blood on Lila's clothing and the kitchen knife used in the attack hidden in a drawer. Lila's phone records showed multiple calls to Emmett on the night of the murder, further implicating her in the crime. As the evidence mounted, the police issued an arrest warrant for Lila. She was located in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, attempting to evade capture. When the police arrived, Lila offered little resistance, her demeanor one of resignation. The trial was a highly publicized event, drawing attention from the local community. Emmett's family attended every session, their presence a poignant reminder of the loss they had suffered. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing Lila's manipulative behavior
and the violent nature of the crime. Witnesses testified about Lila's possessiveness and her efforts to isolate Emmett from his loved ones. Lila's defense team attempted to portray her as a victim of circumstance, arguing that she had acted in a moment of emotional turmoil. However, the overwhelming evidence, coupled with Lila's lack of remorse, left little room for doubt. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict. Lila was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Her conviction brought a sense of closure to Emmett's family, though the pain of their loss would never fully heal. The community mourned the senseless death of one of its own, grappling with the realization that such darkness could exist in their midst. The story of Emmett Dalton and Lila Renshaw became a lasting reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing the signs of abuse. It highlighted the need for community support and the power of collective action in creating a safer world for everyone. Andrew and Paula Keene's love story began like many others in Pinewood, at the annual Harvest Festival 15 years earlier. Andrew, then a shy graduate student, had volunteered to run the physics demonstration booth. Paula, home from college for the weekend, found herself captivated by his passionate explanation of physics. Their courtship was a whirlwind of outdoor adventures and cozy evenings, discussing their dreams for the future. Paula was drawn to Andrew's quiet intensity and brilliant mind, while Andrew was in awe of Paula's confidence and zest for life. They married 2 years later in a simple ceremony by Pinewood Lake, their vows echoing off the surrounding mountains as friends and family cheered. The early years of their marriage were filled with the joy of building a life together. They bought a charming craftsman-style home on Maple Street, its wrap-around porch soon cluttered with Paula's collection of potted herbs and Andrew's telescope. Weekends were spent hiking the nearby trails or hosting game nights with their growing circle of friends. To the outside world, the Keenes appeared to be the perfect couple, supportive, affectionate, and deeply in sync. But as time passed, small fissures began to appear in their relationship. Paula's career in marketing took off, bringing with it late nights at the office and frequent business trips. Andrew, content with his position as a high school teacher, struggled to understand his wife's drive for professional success. He began to feel left behind, his world shrinking as Paula's expanded. Their conversations, once flowing freely, became stilted and superficial. Paula found herself frustrated by Andrew's reluctance to try new experiences or socialize outside their established routines. Andrew, in turn, felt increasingly inadequate in the face of Paula's vibrant social life and career achievements. Attempts to rekindle their connection often fell flat. A romantic getaway to the Oregon coast ended in tense silence as they realized how little they now had in common. Date nights became an exercise in checking boxes rather than genuinely connecting. Even their physical intimacy waned, with both making excuses to avoid the awkwardness of forced passion. It was in this fragile state that Paula Keene first crossed paths with David Reeves, setting in motion a chain of events that would shatter the delicate equilibrium of their marriage and lead to consequences neither could have imagined. The seeds of Paula and David's affair were planted on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the Pinewood Business Association mixer. Paula, representing her marketing firm, found herself drawn to the charismatic newcomer who spoke passionately about revitalizing the town's visual branding. David's enthusiasm was infectious, and Paula soon realized an hour had passed in what felt like minutes. Over the following weeks, their paths continued to cross professionally. Paula's firm hired David for a series of projects, necessitating frequent meetings and collaboration. What began as a working relationship quickly evolved into a friendship, with shared lunches extending well beyond the allotted hour as they discovered a mutual love for contemporary art and obscure indie films. Paula found herself looking forward to their interactions, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. David's attentiveness and genuine interest in her thoughts made her feel seen in a way she had long forgotten. For his part, David was captivated by Paula's quick wit and the passion that shone through when she spoke about her work. The line between professional and personal blurred one evening after a particularly successful presentation to a client. Flush with victory, Paula and David decided to celebrate with drinks at a bar on the outskirts of town. As the night wore on and inhibitions lowered, their conversation turned more intimate.
David's hand brushed against Paula's, lingering a moment too long to be accidental. It was Paula who made the first move, leaning in to kiss David as they stood in the parking lot. The kiss, fueled by alcohol and long-suppressed desire, quickly deepened. Their first clandestine rendezvous took place at a small bed and breakfast in the next town over. As they fell into each other's arms, all thoughts of consequences faded away. In the afterglow, tangled in rumpled sheets, Paula and David convinced themselves that what they had found was too precious to give up, and so began a careful dance of stolen moments and secret meetings, each rendezvous adding another layer to the web of deceit that would ultimately ensnare them all. For months, Andrew Keene remained blissfully unaware of his wife's infidelity. He attributed Paula's improved mood and renewed energy to a positive shift in her work life. However, as winter gave way to spring, small inconsistencies began to gnaw at the edges of his consciousness. It started with little things: Paula's sudden interest in obscure bands she'd never mentioned before, hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when he entered the room, and an inexplicable nervousness whenever plans changed unexpectedly. Andrew initially dismissed these observations, not wanting to acknowledge the growing unease in the pit of his stomach. The pivotal moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Paula had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and as Andrew reached past it to grab a mug, a notification flashed across the screen. The message preview from an unsaved number read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last time was..." Andrew's hand froze mid-air. He knew he shouldn't look, that doing so would violate Paula's privacy. But the seed of suspicion, once planted, grew rapidly. With trembling fingers, he opened the message thread. What he found confirmed his worst fears: months of intimate exchanges, thinly veiled references to secret meetings, and declarations of passion scrolled before his eyes. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when he saw a photo David had sent. Nauseated and shaking, Andrew closed the laptop and retreated to the basement, his mind reeling. When Paula returned home that evening, she found him sitting in the dark, his eyes red-rimmed and distant. The confrontation that followed was brutal in its rawness. Paula, caught off guard, initially tried to deny everything, but faced with the evidence Andrew had discovered, she finally broke down and confessed to the affair. As Paula sobbed and attempted to explain, Andrew listened in stony silence. When she finished, he stood up and walked out of the room without a word, leaving Paula alone with the wreckage of their marriage strewn around her. In the days following his devastating discovery, Andrew Keene surprised everyone with his apparent, calm acceptance of the situation. When Paula, racked with guilt, offered to move out, Andrew insisted she stay. He spoke of forgiveness, of working through their issues together, and of his enduring love for her despite her transgression. Paula, overwhelmed with relief at this unexpected reprieve, threw herself into rebuilding their relationship. She ended things with David in a terse phone call, blocking his number and social media accounts. She suggested couples therapy, date nights, and even a second honeymoon to rekindle their connection. To their friends and colleagues, the Keenes presented a united front. They were seen holding hands at the farmers' market, laughing together at local events, and Andrew even surprised Paula with flowers at her office. Many in Pinewood commented on how the couple seemed stronger than ever, admiring their ability to weather such a storm. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, a very different reality was unfolding. Andrew's forgiveness was a masterful performance, concealing a heart twisted by betrayal and a mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. Each gentle word and loving gesture was calculated, designed to lull Paula into a false sense of security while he grappled with his growing obsession. Late at night, while Paula slept, Andrew would lie awake, his mind replaying imagined scenes of his wife in David's arms. He began keeping a journal, filling pages with dark musings and elaborate fantasies of confronting his wife's lover. The act of writing these thoughts became a pressure valve, allowing him to maintain his cool exterior. While his inner turmoil intensified, Paula, eager to believe in their reconciliation, overlooked the subtle signs of Andrew's internal struggle. As weeks turned into months, the charade became second nature to Andrew. He played the role of the forgiving husband with chilling precision, all while his resentment festered and grew. He began to view his performance as a cosmic joke, taking a perverse pleasure in how easily everyone, especially Paula, bought into the illusion. As summer faded into autumn, Andrew Keene's carefully maintained facade began to crack under the weight of his growing obsession. At school, Andrew found himself unable to focus on his lessons, his mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Paula and David together. He snapped at students for minor infractions, his usual patience evaporating like morning dew. Colleagues noticed the change, whispering concerns about his erratic behavior in the teacher's lounge. As his jealousy deepened, Andrew's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He installed a hidden GPS tracker on Paula's car, justifying the invasion of privacy as necessary to ease his fears. Late at night, he would pore over her location data, constructing elaborate scenarios to explain any deviation from her usual routes. Andrew's once diverse interests narrowed to a singular focus, monitoring Paula and by extension David. He created fake social media accounts to follow David online, scrutinizing every post and interaction for any hint of continued contact with Paula. Hours were spent driving past David's apartment and office, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything to confirm his suspicions. The turning point came on an October evening. Andrew, having convinced himself that Paula was meeting David after work, followed her to a small art gallery downtown. As he watched from across the street, he saw Paula emerge from the gallery, laughing and chatting with a group of colleagues. There was no sign of David. In that moment, something inside Andrew snapped. The realization that his suspicions were unfounded did nothing to quell the rage and humiliation that had been building for months. Sitting in his car watching Paula drive away, Andrew made a decision. If reality wouldn't conform to his suspicions, he would force it to do so. He would create a situation that would justify his jealousy, his anger, and ultimately, the retribution he now craved. The location was his first major decision. Andrew knew the crime scene needed to be isolated enough to avoid witnesses, but not so remote as to arouse suspicion. After careful consideration, he settled on an abandoned lumber mill on the outskirts of town. The dilapidated building, slated for demolition in the coming year, offered both privacy and multiple access points. Next came the question of method. Andrew wanted something that would be difficult to trace back to him, ruling out firearms or any weapon he would need to purchase. After much deliberation, he decided on a garrote, silent, effective, and easily made from household materials. Piece by piece, Andrew accumulated the necessary supplies. He bought lengths of wire from different hardware stores across the county, paying cash each time. Gloves, bleach, and other cleaning supplies were added to regular shopping trips in small quantities to avoid arousing suspicion. He crafted a fake email account under the guise of a local arts organization. He composed a message to David, inviting him to participate in a secretive art installation project at the mill. The email emphasized the need for discretion, explaining that the project was meant to be a surprise for the community. Andrew knew that David's ego and artistic ambitions would make such an offer irresistible. As he waited for David to take the bait, Andrew fine-tuned the details of his plan. He meticulously cleaned his car, removing any traces of hair or fibers that could later implicate him. He purchased a burner phone with cash from a convenience store 2 towns over, using it to communicate with David under the guise of the arts organization coordinator. The night before the planned meeting, Andrew made a final visit to the lumber mill. He cleared a path through the debris, ensuring he would have a clean line of sight from his hiding spot to the entrance. With gloved hands, he positioned the garrote wire behind a stack of rotting pallets, ready to be grabbed at a moment's notice. As he stood in the musty darkness of the mill, the reality of what he was about to do finally hit Andrew. With grim determination, Andrew left the mill and drove home, knowing that the next time he returned it would be to commit murder. Andrew Keene went through the motions of his morning routine, kissing Paula goodbye with a casualness that belied the turmoil roiling within him. He taught his classes on autopilot, his mind fixated on the events to come. As the final bell rang, Andrew hurried to his car, his heart pounding. He drove to the lumber mill, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. Parking a quarter-mile away, he donned a pair of nondescript boots he'd purchased for the occasion and made his way to the mill on foot. Inside the dilapidated structure, Andrew positioned himself behind the stack of pallets, the garrote wire coiled in his gloved hands. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each sound from outside sending a jolt of adrenaline through his body. At precisely 4:30 p.m., the crunch of tires on gravel announced David's arrival. Andrew held his breath as footsteps approached, echoing in the cavernous space. David's voice called out tentatively, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Andrew remained perfectly still, watching as David moved further into the mill. When David's back was turned, Andrew emerged from his hiding spot, wire at the ready. In 3 quick strides, he was behind David. Before David could fully register the presence behind him, Andrew looped the wire around his throat and pulled tight. David's hands flew up, clawing desperately at the wire cutting into his neck. He thrashed violently, his elbow catching Andrew in the ribs with surprising force. The struggle seemed to last an eternity. Andrew's arms burned with the effort of maintaining his grip as David fought for his life. Gradually, David's movements became weaker, his gasps for air more sporadic. With one final convulsive shudder, David Reeves went limp in Andrew's arms. Andrew held on for several minutes more, ensuring that no life remained in his rival's body. When he finally released his grip, David crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. Panting heavily, Andrew stared down at the lifeless form before him. The reality of what he had done crashed over him in waves. He had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing had prepared him for the stark finality of taking a human life. Moving as if in a trance, Andrew began the process of cleaning up the scene. He collected stray fibers from David's clothing, pocketing them to dispose of later. Using bleach he had stashed earlier, he meticulously cleaned any surfaces he or David might have touched. As the light outside began to fade, Andrew dragged David's body to a pre-dug hole in the far corner of the mill. He covered the shallow grave with debris, knowing that the impending demolition would further conceal his crime. Before leaving, Andrew took one last look around the mill with a mix of horror and grim satisfaction. Andrew realized that he had done it. He had committed the perfect murder. Driving home, Andrew found Paula already there, preparing dinner. He forced himself to act normally, commenting on the meal and asking about her day with casualness. Over the next few days, Andrew was hyper-aware of every news report and passing police car. He scoured local news websites for any mention of David's disappearance, but found nothing. The lack of immediate alarm was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. Paula, oblivious to the turmoil beneath her husband's calm exterior, commented on how much more relaxed Andrew seemed lately. She attributed it to their efforts at reconciliation, never suspecting the dark truth behind his changed demeanor. A week after the murder, the first signs of concern about David's whereabouts began to surface. His clients reported missed deadlines and unanswered calls. Friends posted on social media, asking if anyone had heard from him. Andrew watched these developments with a mixture of dread and perverse fascination. When the police finally became involved, Andrew was ready. He had prepared a detailed account of his movements on the day of David's disappearance, complete with fabricated receipts and a meticulously edited digital trail. He even mentioned to Paula in earshot of a neighbor that he hoped that nice graphic designer was okay, establishing an alibi of concern. As the investigation gained momentum, Andrew found himself drawn into the search efforts. He volunteered to help distribute flyers and even organized a search party to comb areas of Pinewood Park. His apparent dedication to finding David threw off any suspicion that might have fallen on him. But beneath his helpful exterior, Andrew was constantly on edge. Every unexpected knock at the door sent his heart racing. He began to have vivid nightmares of David's final moments, waking up drenched in sweat. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, a constant, invisible burden that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. As days turned into weeks with no sign of David Reeves, the Pinewood Police Department intensified its investigation. Detective Laura Stewart, a recent transfer from Portland with a reputation for solving cold cases, was assigned to lead the inquiry. Stewart's first step was to retrace David's last known movements. Interviews with his clients and friends painted a picture of a man who had been excited about an upcoming art project, though details were frustratingly vague. Stewart's interest was piqued by mentions of a secretive installation at an undisclosed location. The detective's scrutiny soon turned to David's personal life. It didn't take long for rumors of his affair with Paula Keene to surface. Stewart approached the subject delicately in her interview with Paula, who admitted to the past indiscretion but insisted it had ended months ago. Andrew, present for the interview, played the part of the supportive husband perfectly, expressing sympathy for David's disappearance despite the history. As Stewart dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. David's bank records showed no unusual activity, and his passport remained in his apartment. His car was found parked at his residence, ruling out the possibility that he had simply left town. The more Stewart investigated, the more convinced she became that David had met with foul play. A breakthrough came when a hiker reported finding David's phone in Pinewood Park. miles from his usual haunts. Forensic analysis revealed that the phone had been wiped clean of data, an act that struck Stewart as deliberate and suspicious. With each new piece of evidence, the circle of suspects narrowed. Stewart found herself returning again and again to the Keens. Paula's affair provided a motive, but her genuine distress seemed authentic. Andrew's alibi was solid, yet something about his too perfect responses nagged at Stewart's instincts. As autumn deepened into winter, the case consumed Detective Stewart. She spent long nights poring over evidence, convinced that the key to unraveling the mystery lay somewhere in the complex web of relationships surrounding David Reeves. Little did she know, the truth was far closer and far more chilling than she could have imagined. The turning point in the investigation came on a frigid December morning, 3 months after David Reeves's disappearance. A team of surveyors, assessing the old lumber mill for demolition, made a grisly discovery. Partially unearthed by recent heavy rains, David's decomposing body was found in a shallow grave. Detective Stewart and her team descended on the scene, meticulously combing the area for evidence. Despite Andrew's careful cleanup, trace evidence remained. Fibers matched to David's clothing were found embedded in the floorboards, and DNA analysis of the soil revealed blood spatter consistent with a violent struggle. The discovery of the body shifted the investigation into high gear. Stewart re-interviewed everyone connected to David, this time with a sharper focus. It was during her second conversation with Andrew Keene that things began to unravel. Stewart noticed subtle inconsistencies in Andrew's story, minor details that didn't quite align with his previous statements. His demeanor, once calmly cooperative, now had an undercurrent of nervousness. When Stewart casually mentioned that they had surveillance footage from near the lumber mill, she saw a flicker of panic cross Andrew's face before he quickly composed himself. That momentary lapse was all Stewart needed. She intensified her questioning, probing deeper into Andrew's alibi for the day of David's disappearance. Under the relentless pressure, Andrew's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a dramatic turn, Andrew broke down and confessed to the murder. He recounted the entire sordid tale, his discovery of the affair, his months of secret planning, and the final fatal confrontation at the lumber mill. As he spoke, it was as if a dam had burst, years of pent-up emotion pouring out in a torrent of words. Paula, brought in for questioning separately, was shattered by the revelation. She struggled to reconcile the loving, forgiving husband she thought she knew with the man capable of such a calculated act of violence. Her world, already fragile from the strain of the affair and its aftermath, collapsed entirely. As news of Andrew's confession spread, the town of Pinewood reeled in shock. The image of the Keens as the perfect couple, even in the face of adversity, was shattered. Friends and colleagues struggled to understand how they could have missed the signs of Andrew's deteriorating mental state. In the following weeks, more details emerged. His internet search history revealed months of research on undetectable poisons and body disposal methods. The depth of his obsession and the meticulous nature of his planning chilled even the most seasoned detectives. Andrew Keene was charged with first-degree murder. As he awaited trial, psychologists debated whether his actions were the result of temporary insanity or a more deep-seated pathology. Paula, grappling with her own guilt and the traumatic loss of both her lover and her husband, retreated from public life. The case of David Reeves's murder would long be remembered in Pinewood as a tragic reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic settings, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. It served as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of jealousy and the unforeseen consequences of betrayal, forever changing the way the town viewed itself and its inhabitants. Sebastian Thompson, a successful businessman, and Hazel, his homemaker wife, had been married for 15 years. Their marriage, once vibrant, had been faltering, prompting them to seek professional help. They enrolled in a retreat led by the renowned Dr. David Green, a charismatic therapist with a reputation for mending fractured relationships. On the 4th night of the retreat, Sebastian was found dead in their cabin. His death, initially appearing as a tragic accident, soon revealed darker undertones. The investigation uncovered a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green, hidden from everyone but the two, was a catalyst for the events that unfolded. Dr. Green, once a beacon of hope for struggling couples, was now at the center of a murder investigation. His charming exterior masked a manipulative mind with financial motives. As the truth unraveled, it became clear that Sebastian's death was no accident, but a coldly orchestrated murder. This true crime story delves into the complex relationships, personal histories, and the sinister plot that led to Sebastian Thompson's untimely death. It examines the psychological manipulation employed by Dr. Green, the emotional turmoil of Hazel, and the meticulous investigation that brought the truth to light. This is the chilling account of a couple's therapy retreat that turned deadly, revealing the dark side of love and trust. The couple's therapy retreat was situated in a secluded, luxurious cabin in the mountains, surrounded by dense forests and picturesque views. The location was chosen to provide an escape from the daily stresses of life, offering a peaceful environment conducive to healing and introspection. As Sebastian and Hazel Thompson arrived at the retreat, they were greeted by Dr. David Green. With his warm smile and reassuring presence, he exuded confidence and empathy, instantly putting the participants at ease. Alongside Sebastian and Hazel, there were 3 other couples, each grappling with their own issues. The retreat kicked off with a group session, where each couple introduced themselves and shared their reasons for attending. Sebastian, tall and well-built, spoke with a hint of frustration in his voice. He expressed his desire to rekindle the love and trust that had diminished over the years. Hazel, petite and attractive, echoed his sentiments, though her eyes betrayed a deeper, unspoken sadness. Dr. Green facilitated the sessions with skill and sensitivity, creating an atmosphere of openness and vulnerability. He emphasized the importance of honest communication and trust, urging couples to confront their issues head-on. The initial sessions were intense, with emotions running high as old wounds were reopened. Sebastian and Hazel's interactions were Sebastianed by underlying tension. Sebastian's controlling nature clashed with Hazel's growing sense of independence. Their exchanges were fraught with resentment and unspoken accusations. Dr. Green seemed particularly attentive to their case, often singling them out for deeper analysis. In private sessions, the dynamics were different. Dr. Green focused on building rapport, carefully listening to their individual grievances. He offered Hazel a sympathetic ear, understanding her feelings of entrapment and frustration. For Sebastian, he played the role of a stern yet caring advisor, urging him to let go of his controlling tendencies. The other couples at the retreat observed the palpable tension between Sebastian and Hazel. They noticed how Dr. Green seemed to give Hazel more attention, often engaging her in deeper conversations. This did not go unnoticed by Sebastian, who began to feel a growing sense of unease. The retreat's idyllic setting provided a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil brewing beneath the surface. The towering pines and serene lake seemed to mock the chaos within the hearts of the participants. As the days progressed, the initial hope for reconciliation gave way to a sense of impending doom. Sebastian and Hazel's relationship, instead of healing, seemed to be unraveling further. Dr. Green's presence, once a source of comfort, became a point of contention. The other couples, too, began to sense that something was amiss, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. As the retreat moved into its 3rd day, the tension reached a boiling point. The stage was set for a tragic turn of events that would shatter the tranquil facade of the retreat and expose the dark secrets lurking beneath. Sebastian Thompson's life was a testament to hard work and ambition. Born into a middle-class family, he had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination and relentless effort. By the age of 45, he had secured a high-ranking position at a prestigious firm, earning a handsome salary and enjoying the perks of success. However, his professional achievements came at a cost. The long hours and constant pressure strained his personal life, creating a rift between him and Hazel. Sebastian's control issues stemmed from his desire for perfection. He demanded the best from himself and those around him, often leading to conflicts at home. His need to control every aspect of his life extended to his marriage, where he expected Hazel to conform to his ideals. This created a suffocating environment for Hazel, who felt increasingly trapped in a role she hadn't chosen. Hazel Thompson, in contrast, had led a more sheltered life. Growing up in a small town, she had married Sebastian young and dedicated herself to being a supportive wife and homemaker. Initially, she found fulfillment in this role, but as the years passed, she began to feel a deep sense of dissatisfaction.
The love and attention she once received from Sebastian had dwindled, replaced by criticism and control. Hazel's discontent grew as she watched her husband thrive in his career, while her own aspirations were stifled. She longed for freedom, for a chance to explore her own identity outside the confines of her marriage. It was during this time of vulnerability that she met Dr. David Green. Dr. Green's background was shrouded in mystery. He was a charismatic figure, known for his ability to connect with people on a deep emotional level. His reputation as a skilled therapist had earned him a loyal following, and his retreats were highly sought after. However, beneath his polished exterior lay a manipulative mind. Dr. Green had a history of exploiting vulnerable individuals for personal gain. His charm and intelligence masked a dark side that few were aware of. He had a knack for identifying those who were emotionally fragile and used their insecurities to his advantage. Financial gain was a significant motivator for him, but so was the thrill of control. Hazel's vulnerability and dissatisfaction made her an easy target for Dr. Green. He began their affair with calculated precision, offering her the attention and validation she craved. Their interactions started innocently enough, with late-night conversations and sympathetic listening. Gradually, he intensified his influence, making Hazel dependent on his approval and guidance. Dr. Green's manipulation extended beyond the affair. He subtly planted seeds of doubt and resentment in Hazel's mind, exacerbating the existing tension in her marriage. He portrayed himself as the only one who truly understood her, driving a wedge between her and Sebastian. His ultimate goal was to remove Sebastian from the equation, both to deepen his control over Hazel and to gain financially. Sebastian, unaware of the affair, sensed a shift in Hazel's behavior. She became more distant and withdrawn, often disappearing for hours without explanation. His attempts to confront her were met with defensiveness and anger, further straining their relationship. He turned to Dr. Green for guidance, unaware that the man he trusted was orchestrating his downfall. Dr. Green's plan was meticulous. He exploited the trust placed in him by both Sebastian and Hazel, using their therapy sessions to manipulate their emotions. He created scenarios that heightened the conflict between them, pushing them to the brink. His aim was to drive Sebastian to a point of desperation where he could be easily eliminated. As the retreat progressed, Dr. Green's influence over Hazel grew stronger. She became increasingly reliant on him, viewing him as her savior from a life of misery. Her perception of Sebastian shifted from a loving husband to an oppressive figure, a change fueled by Dr. Green's constant manipulation. The stage was set for a tragic culmination. Sebastian's frustration and Hazel's growing dependence on Dr. Green created a volatile mix, primed for a deadly outcome. Dr. Green, ever the puppet master, watched as his plan unfolded, confident in his ability to control the narrative. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green began subtly, almost innocently. During the early sessions, Dr. Green took a special interest in Hazel, recognizing her vulnerability. He offered her a sympathetic ear and gentle words of encouragement, which she desperately needed. Their relationship escalated during private therapy sessions. Dr. Green's office, a cozy room with soft lighting and plush furniture, became a sanctuary for Hazel. She poured out her heart, sharing her frustrations and dreams. Dr. Green listened attentively, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers, making her feel seen and understood. Late-night conversations turned into secret rendezvous. They would meet in secluded spots around the retreat, hidden from the prying eyes of other participants. Their meetings were filled with whispered confessions and stolen kisses, each encounter deepening their bond. Hazel's internal conflict was intense. She felt a growing attachment to Dr. Green, yet guilt gnawed at her conscience. She loved Sebastian, or at least she thought she did. But the connection she felt with Dr. Green was unlike anything she had experienced. He made her feel alive, appreciated, and desired. Dr. Green, on the other hand, was playing a calculated game. He knew how to manipulate Hazel's emotions, feeding her insecurities and deepening her dependence on him. His motives were far from pure. Financial gain and control drove his actions. He saw Hazel not just as a lover, but as a pawn in his grander scheme. Their affair was a dangerous dance fraught with risk. Hazel's behavior became increasingly erratic, her guilt manifesting as anxiety and paranoia. She feared discovery, not just for the affair but for the growing realization that Dr. Green had a hold over her that she couldn't break. One evening, as they met in a secluded part of the retreat, Dr. Green's true nature began to surface.
He spoke of their future together, painting a picture of a life free from Sebastian's control. Hazel, caught in his web, began to believe in the possibility of a new life. However, the cost of this new life was steep, and the shadows of doubt began to creep into her mind. Dr. Green's manipulation extended to Sebastian as well. He planted seeds of suspicion, subtly suggesting that Hazel's behavior was a reaction to Sebastian's controlling nature. He urged Sebastian to be more understanding and patient, all the while knowing that his advice would only exacerbate the tension. As the retreat progressed, the affair became more intense, the secrecy heightening the thrill and the danger. One evening, during a particularly heated session, the tension boiled over. Sebastian, feeling cornered and misunderstood, lashed out verbally. He accused Hazel of not trying, of already giving up on their marriage. Hazel, instead of responding, looked to Dr. Green for support. This small gesture was the breaking point for Sebastian. His face contorted with a mixture of hurt and rage, and he stormed out of the session. Dr. Green seized the opportunity to further manipulate Hazel. He comforted her, emphasizing how Sebastian's behavior was proof of his controlling nature. Hazel, emotionally fragile and desperate for validation, absorbed Dr. Green's words, her trust in him growing stronger. The other couples were taken aback by Sebastian's outburst. They had their own issues, but none had witnessed such a dramatic confrontation. Dr. Green addressed the group, explaining that sometimes conflicts needed to be brought to the surface to be resolved. His explanation was met with nods of understanding, though doubts lingered. Sebastian, alone and seething, wandered the retreat grounds. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing Hazel, not just to the problems in their marriage, but to Dr. Green himself. His mind raced with suspicions and fears, each thought more troubling than the last. He needed to find a way to reach Hazel, to break through the barriers that seemed to be growing between them. That night in their cabin, the atmosphere was tense and heavy with unspoken words. Sebastian tried to reach out to Hazel, to apologize and explain, but she was distant, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere. The silence between them was deafening, a stark contrast to the arguments that had filled the past days. Dr. Green, watching from the shadows, felt a sense of triumph. His plan was unfolding perfectly. The tension between Sebastian and Hazel was at its peak, and the stage was set for the next phase of his scheme. He knew that Sebastian was close to breaking, and all he needed was one final push. As the retreat moved into its fourth day, the sense of impending doom grew stronger. The other couples, though unaware of the full extent of the turmoil, sensed that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Green maintained his facade of professionalism, but his eyes betrayed a glint of anticipation. The stage was set for a tragic climax, one that would shatter the lives of those involved and expose the dark undercurrents that had been simmering beneath the surface. The tension, carefully cultivated by Dr. Green, was about to reach a deadly crescendo. The fourth night of the retreat was shrouded in an eerie stillness. The usual sounds of the forest seemed muted, and a heavy fog rolled in, enveloping the cabin in a ghostly embrace. Sebastian and Hazel had retired to their room after another tense day, the silence between them more oppressive than ever. Around midnight, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. The other couples, jolted from their sleep, rushed out of their rooms, confusion and fear etched on their faces. The source of the scream was unmistakable. It came from Sebastian and Hazel's cabin. Dr. Green, appearing composed yet concerned, quickly took charge. He directed the others to stay back while he entered the cabin. Inside, he found Hazel, pale and trembling, standing over Sebastian's lifeless body. The room was in disarray, signs of a struggle evident. Sebastian lay on the floor, his eyes wide open in a final expression of shock and pain. There were visible bruises on his neck, and a broken lamp lay nearby, its jagged edges stained with blood. Hazel, in a state of shock, kept muttering that she didn't know what happened, that she had woken up to find him like this. Dr. Green, masking his satisfaction, wrapped his arm around Hazel, guiding her away from the scene. He assured the other participants that he would handle the situation and contacted the local authorities. Within minutes, the tranquility of the retreat was shattered by the arrival of police and paramedics. The initial investigation pointed to foul play. The signs of struggle and the nature of Sebastian's injuries indicated a violent confrontation. Hazel, as the only other person in the room, became the prime suspect. She was taken into custody for questioning, her dazed state complicating the initial interrogation. Dr. Green, playing the role of the concerned therapist, vouched for Hazel.
He explained to the police that she had been under immense stress and that Sebastian had been aggressive. He painted a picture of a woman pushed to her limits, subtly suggesting that she might have acted in self-defense. The police, while not entirely convinced, took Dr. Green's statements into account. They began piecing together the events leading up to the murder. Other participants were interviewed, and it became clear that the Thompsons' relationship had been in turmoil. The tension between them, coupled with Sebastian's controlling nature, provided a potential motive. However, as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in Hazel's account began to emerge. She couldn't clearly remember the events of the night, her memories a foggy jumble of fear and confusion. Her emotional state was fragile, and she seemed genuinely distraught over Sebastian's death. Dr. Green continued to support Hazel, maintaining his role as her confidant and protector. He provided the police with additional details, carefully crafting a narrative that supported his version of events. He portrayed Sebastian as a domineering husband, and Hazel as a victim driven to desperation. As the police delved deeper, they uncovered the affair between Hazel and Dr. Green. This revelation added a new dimension to the case. The affair provided a potential motive for Hazel, but it also raised questions about Dr. Green's involvement. His influence over Hazel was evident, and some investigators began to suspect that he might have had a hand in the events. Dr. Green, sensing the growing suspicion, remained calm and cooperative. He deflected attention from himself, emphasizing his role as a therapist trying to help a troubled couple. His charm and professionalism worked in his favor, but the police weren't entirely convinced. The discovery of the affair shifted the focus of the investigation. Hazel, now seen as both a suspect and a victim, faced intense scrutiny. Dr. Green, while not officially a suspect, was under the radar. The stage was set for a complex and convoluted investigation, with multiple layers of deception and manipulation to unravel. As the night wore on, the sense of tragedy and confusion deepened. Sebastian's death, initially seen as a tragic accident, now appeared to be a murder driven by hidden motives and dark secrets. The serene retreat had become the scene of a chilling crime, and the truth was far from clear. The police investigation into Sebastian Thompson's death quickly intensified. Detective Sarah Collins, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail, was assigned to the case. She arrived at the retreat the morning after the murder, determined to uncover the truth behind the tragic event. Detective Collins began by interviewing the other participants. Their accounts painted a picture of escalating tension between Sebastian and Hazel. Most of them mentioned Dr. Green's unusual interest in Hazel and his seemingly antagonistic stance towards Sebastian. The affair, already known to the police, became a focal point in her inquiry. In her interview with Hazel, Detective Collins noticed the woman's fragility and confusion. Hazel's account of the night was fragmented and inconsistent. She repeatedly claimed she couldn't remember what had happened, that she had woken up to find Sebastian dead. Her emotional distress seemed genuine, yet Collins couldn't ignore the possibility that Hazel was involved. Dr. Green was interviewed next. He maintained his composed demeanor, offering a polished account of his interactions with Sebastian and Hazel. He admitted to the affair, describing it as a regrettable but understandable consequence of Hazel's unhappy marriage. He framed himself as a supportive figure, trying to help Hazel through her emotional turmoil. Despite his cooperative attitude, Detective Collins couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Green was hiding something. His responses were too calculated, too perfect. She decided to delve deeper into his background, looking for any signs of past misconduct. Through retreats, other participants provided further insights. Several of them mentioned the escalating arguments between Sebastian and Hazel, and a few noted that Dr. Green seemed to exacerbate these conflicts rather than resolve them. One participant, a woman named Rachel, mentioned overhearing a particularly heated argument between Sebastian and Hazel the night before the murder. Detective Collins followed up on Rachel's lead, examining the retreat's layout and the possibility of others hearing the argument. The cabin's isolated location made it unlikely that anyone outside could have heard, suggesting that Rachel might have been closer than she admitted. Collins began to consider the possibility of other witnesses or accomplices. The forensic team provided crucial evidence. The bruises on Sebastian's neck indicated strangulation, and the broken lamp suggested a violent struggle. However, there were no defensive wounds on Hazel, raising questions about her involvement in the physical altercation. The presence of an unidentified fingerprint on the lamp added another layer of mystery.
As the investigation progressed, Collins discovered financial irregularities linked to Dr. Green. Large sums of money had been transferred from Hazel's account to an offshore account in Dr. Green's name. This revelation pointed to a clear financial motive, suggesting that Dr. Green had been manipulating Hazel not just emotionally, but financially as well. Armed with Hazel's partial recollection and the financial evidence, Detective Collins confronted Dr. Green. His calm facade cracked as he faced the mounting evidence. The fingerprint on the broken lamp, initially unidentified, was found to belong to Dr. Green. This evidence, combined with Hazel's testimony and the financial trail, solidified the case against him. Dr. Green's manipulative tactics had backfired, leaving a trail of evidence that pointed directly to him. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rachel Foster, meticulously laid out the evidence against Dr. Green. They highlighted his manipulative tactics, the financial exploitation of Hazel, and the clear motive behind Sebastian's murder. Witnesses, including Hazel and other retreat participants, testified about the escalating tension and Dr. Green's undue influence. The jury, after deliberating for several hours, found Dr. Green guilty of first-degree murder and financial exploitation, and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the end, the truth had been uncovered, and justice had been served. The scars left behind were deep, but they were also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Hazel and the other survivors found a way to move forward, their experiences shaping a future where trust and healing could coexist. Emily Parker was born and raised in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio. Her parents, Richard and Ann Parker, were well-respected members of the community. Richard owned a local hardware store, while Ann was a nurse at the nearby hospital. Emily, the middle child with an older brother, Jack, and a younger sister, Sarah, was the apple of her parents' eyes. From an early age, Emily exhibited a zest for life. She was an exceptional student, excelling in her studies and participating in various extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching emerged during her high school years, inspired by a history teacher who brought the past to life in vivid detail. Emily pursued her dream by attending Ohio State University, where she earned her degree in education. After college, Emily returned to Maplewood and secured a teaching position at the local elementary school. Her dedication to her students was unparalleled. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Her colleagues admired her enthusiasm, and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Emily had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Emily met David Reynolds at a friend's wedding. He was charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. David, a financial consultant from New York City, was visiting for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. David lavished Emily with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year David proposed. Emily, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Emily's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about David. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Emily, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that David was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Emily's friends from Maplewood and David's associates from New York mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in St. Lucia, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. David Reynolds was born and raised in Queens, New York. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Reynolds, struggled to make ends meet. Thomas worked as a mechanic, while Margaret held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. David, the eldest, grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, David exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University where he studied finance. David's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. David quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described David as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. David's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When David met Emily Parker, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like David was truly in love for the first time. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. David's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. David's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habits. He kept these issues hidden from Emily, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Emily as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where David's deceptions began to catch up with him. St. Lucia, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for David and Emily's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort, their bungalow perched on the edge of a secluded cove. The first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Emily documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Emily's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic. Soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. Fellow diners noticed the couple laughing and holding hands, seemingly in love. The staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, David suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Emily, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, the sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. David later recounted that Emily had expressed a desire to take a swim. She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to David, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Emily. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Emily was nowhere to be found. David's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Emily. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, David's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. The police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Emily's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Emily vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, David's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Hayes was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Hayes arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview David Reynolds. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Hayes observed David's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension that the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. David recounted the events of the night Emily disappeared, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Hayes listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Emily might have had to leave suddenly. David's answers were consistent, but Hayes felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with David's story while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that David seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. A couple staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Hayes' team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Emily's belongings neatly packed, her passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. The tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Hayes looked into David's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, David was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Hayes interviewed David's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described David as charming but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague, who requested anonymity, mentioned that David had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and David had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that David was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around David grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Emily's handwriting, found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about David. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Emily, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into David Reynolds' affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Hayes and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. David's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debts. As Hayes delved deeper, he discovered that David had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving David with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. David's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play. With Emily's disappearance, questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Hayes' team found that David had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Emily, raising further suspicions. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about David's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Emily, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that David's involvement in Emily's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of David's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of David Reynolds's double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs. Detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. David's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglements. Detective Hayes and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about David's deceptive nature. One of the women, Laura Mitchell, a marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with David as passionate but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Emily. Laura was unaware of David's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media. Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Jessica Evans, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and David had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Jessica, too, was in the dark about David's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Rachel Turner, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with David for nearly 2 years. Rachel's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how David had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Rachel, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Emily's disappearance. David's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Emily spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how David would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that David might have seen Emily as both an obstacle and a solution to his problems. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, the pressure on David had reached a breaking point. Emily's disappearance and the subsequent focus on David threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Hayes pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depths of David's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Hayes believed he had a clear picture of David Reynolds' involvement in Emily's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Alex Carter, a private investigator from New York. Alex contacted Detective Hayes, claiming to have crucial information about David Reynolds and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Hayes arranged a meeting. In a dimly lit cafe, Alex revealed his connection to the case. Alex explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate David Reynolds months before Emily's disappearance. His client had suspected David of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Alex's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking David's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealings. But Alex's most startling revelation was about Emily. According to his findings, Emily had discovered David's infidelity and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying David. This friend, concerned for Emily's safety,
had anonymously hired Alex to gather evidence, hoping to give Emily a way out of her situation. Alex provided Detective Hayes with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between David and an unknown associate discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that David had been plotting something sinister, although the details were vague. This new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Emily might have been aware of David's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Hayes considered the idea that Emily could have staged her disappearance to escape David's clutches, although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove. Hayes decided to re-interview everyone involved, armed with the new information. He spoke again with Emily's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Emily's best friend, Lisa, revealed that Emily had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Lisa about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about David. David's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Alex Carter as fabrications. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicion surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Hayes to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Emily, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on David, began to speculate about Emily's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Alex Carter provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Hayes knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Hayes and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed David Reynolds was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Emily had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of St. Lucia discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Emily's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Emily. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Emily had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation, after uncovering David's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Emily's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Hayes interviewed Emily extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering David's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Alex Carter had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. David Reynolds was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Alex Carter, combined with Emily's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of David's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Emily returned to Maplewood, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became an advocate for domestic abuse victims, sharing her story to help others in similar situations. The media's fascination with her life eventually faded, but Emily remained a symbol of resilience and survival. Detective Hayes reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It had been a journey through layers of deception and human frailty, revealing the dark complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. The resolution, while not entirely satisfying, brought a measure of justice and closure to those affected. In the end, the case of Emily Parker's disappearance was a stark reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, there can lie a twisted web of secrets waiting to be uncovered.